What's up everyone, how are you all? Today we are back with another amazing Naruto story. What if Naruto was imprisoned with an inhumane seal and released years later? If you enjoy then please like, share and do comments. The third Hokage stared at the infant in his hands. The baby continued to scream in pain, the wail echoing throughout the tower. Jiraiya stared at the boy, his eyes wide. It was clear that he was scared. Sarutobi stared down at the infant, his mind in turmoil. The seal had not been completed. What the hell can be done? Sarutobi asked his student. Jiraiya shook his head. There were in reality very few options left that were humane. Sarutobi exhaled. He feared this. He turned and retrieved a scroll from a shelf in the Hokage's office. In it contained one of the Yondaime's experiments concerning sealing, but he had abandoned it due to its cruelty on the subject. However, Sarutobi felt that it was his only option left. It was nearly as effective as summoning a death god but far more cruel. He handed the scroll to Jiraiya, who paled. "It's our only hope," he said tiredly. Jiraiya nodded, although his face was a mask of sorrow. This kid always seemed to get the raw end on the deal. "I hope you can find some measure of happiness," Jiraiya whispered as he opened the scroll and began to form the seal. He placed his hand on the infant's stomach and saw chains begin to form. If possible, the infant screamed louder. He then placed his 2 fingers on the infant's wrist, and saw the chains also start to form. He stood back and watched as they intertwined around the infant's torso. The 2 chains met and a final link was formed. The result was that the child's upper body was encircled with chains, his arms forcefully wrapped around him at a position that resembled a straight jacket without the material. His screaming still echoed throughout the tower. Sarutobi placed the child in the cell at the bottom of the tower. In truth, he had never wanted it to be like this, but it had to be done. The council had insisted on a prison cell because of the unstable state that the seal was in. However, Sarutobi had managed to make sure that he would be released when the demon was sealed. Sarutobi shuddered. He felt sorry for Naruto. WN01 knew how long that would take. 12 years later, Naruto stood before the council, his blue eyes taking in all around him. Dressed in a straight jacket and black pants, he looked more like a mental patient than anything else. That still didn't stop the council from grilling him though. Not that Naruto knew though. To him it was just another adventure. The questions asked were ludicrous to the extreme. Things such as whether he wanted to destroy the village or whether he liked violence were the routine questions. Sarutobi sighed. In truth, Naruto didn't even know what the village really was. He only knew what Sarutobi told him on his daily visits. Naruto had listened to all his stories intently and had made a promise early on that he would live in the village one day. Sarutobi smiled when Naruto told him this. He hoped that the boy's wish came true. As he looked across the faces of the council, he had hope. Year after year, the boy's boundless innocence had swayed the council from keeping him imprisoned to letting him go. And if it wasn't for that incident 3 years ago, he would have been. 3 years previous, Naruto lay asleep in his bunk in his cell, breathing silently. 2 Chunin had gotten drunk and had decided to take it upon themselves to avenge the village, even though most of the village didn't even know that he existed. Only those on the council knew, and they were sworn to secrecy. The only reason they knew who he was because the Haruno clan head who sat on the council had gotten drunk and told them who their mysterious boy was. The clan head had passed out shortly after and they had gone off in search of the Naruto. The 2 had arrived at the building and had let themselves in. Due to their working as admin staff there, they were able to gain access to the lower areas. Over the years, the guard on the boy had decreased to 1 Chunin at any on time. It was usually a punishment given to those shinobi who were insubordinate. The one guarding the door that night was punishment for sleeping on guard duty. He was awake, barely, but by his swaying it was an effort. The Haruno ninja easily knocked him out and fished out the key. They had unlocked the door and crept into the room, kunai flashing in the light from the door. What happened next is what had held up his release for 3 years. As their killing intent began to fill the room, the demon within the boy reacted. Naruto's chains roared to life as he leapt out of the bed. Over the years they had stopped restraining him physically and had become a weapon. 1 chain had slammed into the first Haruno's raised fist and had extended horizontally and had wrapped itself around his throat and wrist. The second had charged around the first and also attacked. In their drunken sat, they had no caution and were not in a frame of mind suitable for combat. As more chains were generated from Naruto's body, he loosened his arms and he grabbed one of the chains and used it like a rope. It wrapped itself around the second ninja, who in the confined space could not react. He was soon tied in chains. He looked at the boy and saw a vicious grin on his face. At that moment he truly was a demon. The guard regained conscious and saw that the blonde boy was waving to him. The guard immediately noticed the smell of blood and ran at the door. Inside he saw carnage. All that remained was scattered remains of limbs, organs and blood. The Chunin struggled to hold in his food as he looked down at the boy. He had a serious expression on his face. "It's hard to sleep with all that smell around," Naruto said in a serious smell. The guard blanched as he went to summon the Hokage. How could he be so nonchalant? Present, the Hokage thought back to that night and was not sure if he regretted teaching Naruto the arts of the ninja in their regular meetings. Either way, that incident had fired a range of speculation that had all but killed Naruto's wish to leave his cell. It was only dying down even now. The only person who openly opposed to his release was the Haruno clan head Haruka, who had not gotten over the death of the two Haruno ninja. The Hokage continued his musings until the speaker of the council rose. "We now have our recommendation, and that is that Naruto be allowed to return to the village only under constant supervision, and that the seal be regularly checked," the speaker said calmly. The Hokage suppressed a grin. It had been a long time coming. He nodded and rose to leave, followed by the council. Perhaps Naruto's life could only improve from here on. Naruto stood in front of the classroom, his head staring at all the new sights. It was all so new to him. The occupants of the class all stared at the new addition with undisguised curiosity. It was not often that they saw a young boy dressed in a straitjacket and chains wrapped around his body. If one looked closely, they would have seen that the chains started at his wrists and ended with entering his shirt near his stomach. But they did not look closely. Haruka looked down at the blonde standing next to him and smiled. It wasn't often that one saw such sheer innocence. His clear blue eyes showed no hatred, only curiosity and joy. Haruka was sure that the latter would fade soon. This was the academy after all. Haruka turned his gaze to the class and saw their looks of curiosity. Even Sasuke and Shikamaru were staring. Naruto just grinned in response. Haruka wondered where he should sit Naruto. Most of the class was immediately out of the question as they would immediately bombard him with questions. He just got the feeling that Naruto just didn't need that kind of interrogation. He glanced at Shikamaru and saw that the only chair next to him had Choji, and sighed. Shikamaru was perfect, but he wouldn't dream of moving Choji. He surveyed the rest of the classroom and saw the blank seat next to Sasuke and smirked. Sasuke would not bombard Naruto with questions, and Naruto would perhaps pull Sasuke out of his brooding. Innocence had a bad habit of doing that. "Class, this is Naruto, and from today he will be joining the class. I know that it's a bit late, but make him welcome, okay?" Haruka told his class with his teacher voice. Before he could say any more, Naruto interrupted. "Hello everyone, I'm Naruto, but you all knew that. Let's have fun," he yelled with a huge grin. There was silence before laughter broke through. Half the class were laughing, the other half were looking at him as if he were nuts. One, however, just glared. Haruka just cleared his throat, just as shocked as everyone else was. "Thank you, Naruto. Now can you take your seat next to Sasuke, please?" he said, pointing at Sasuke. Naruto nodded and walked over to Sasuke and pulled the chair with his foot and sat behind the desk. When seated, he turned his head and grinned at Sasuke. Sasuke just stared back at him. "You're weird," was all he said. Sasuke almost choked. Gone was his casual indifference. The boys around them stifled a laugh while the girls glared. Naruto just grinned. Sasuke just sighed. It was going to be a long year. Time skip. The final exam. Haruka looked at the rest of the class. He sighed as his gaze turned to Naruto. The boy was a strange one. It had soon been revealed that the boy could use his hands, but just chose not to unless forced to participate. I practice. That was when they also found out that he could manipulate his chains. That had been a shock for the class, who had immediately assumed he had a bloodline. Even Sasuke was interested. Naruto had just shrugged and grinned when asked the questions. They had soon lost interest when they didn't see the chains move again except in class. Haruka was still confused. Just who was he? He was no prodigy. He He had proven that on the first day when Iruka had asked a particularly difficult question and if anyone in the class knew the answer. The word, Mimi, had echoed through the class and Iruka had asked Naruto to answer. "Don't know about the rest of you but I don't," he had responded. Most of the class chuckled while Sasuke just slammed his head into the desk. Iruka had just yelled at him for being an idiot, even though he had laughed with the rest of them on the inside. The rest of the time before the exam was like that. His grasp of ninjutsu was below par as was his class work. His only positive was his taijutsu, and even that was average. His chains were some kind of shield. He rarely attacked but was never injured. Even Sasuke could not land a decent attack on him. But even so he would be struggling to pass. About halfway through the exam Iruka motioned Naruto down to the front. Naruto grinned and rushed down. Most of the class just shook their heads. Most people felt sorry for him. Nearly everyone in the class seemed to get along with him. All except for Sakura. She had never once made an attempt to like him. Naruto for his part just stayed away from her. Iruka wondered why that was as Naruto talked to everyone and anyone in the class. His first words to Sasuke pointed that fact out to Iruka. He was pulled out from his musings by the shaking of chains. He looked across and saw Naruto's face contort with effort. Iruka sighed. Everyone in class knew what was going to happen. And it did. All the class looked down at the rather sick-looking Naruto standing next to the real one. Most of the class sighed. He was after all well liked by most. Naruto however just grinned and walked back to his seat. On his way back to his seat Kiba patted his back and Choji just nodded his head in sympathy. Naruto just shrugged his shoulders in response. As he sat down even Sasuke muttered, "Better luck next time," to him. Naruto just grinned. Iruka looked at the rest of the class and saw that most were a bit sad. He did however notice a feral grin on one of his students' face. By now he knew that he shouldn't be surprised at Sakura's reaction. She did seem to hate him. That night, Iruka and Naruto sat at the ramen stand eating. Or rather Iruka was eating and Naruto was devouring it at a remarkable rate. Iruka had long gotten over being shocked at how quickly Naruto ate ramen. It was as if it was his religion. Iruka sighed. When he had asked Naruto about what he was going to do now all he had gotten was that he would try again. Iruka sighed. Naruto didn't deserve this. Sakura was on cloud 9. Not only had the murderer been kept from being a ninja but she had also passed. It had been a good day for her in general. She had been shocked when she had been told that the person who had murdered her cousins was going to be joining her class and had hated him on sight. How dare a murderer act like that with a huge grin on his face? She had taken a perverse pleasure in watching him fail. She was still confused as to how he had killed her cousins but her mother had told her on no uncertain terms that he was indeed the killer when she voiced her disbelief after the first day. Now she was getting rid of the murderer once and for all. She went to meet Mizuki. Naruto was walking home when Mizuki approached him. The ninja had received the message from Sakura about what to do with Naruto. When he had read the note it had been a shock, but soon he could see the advantages. He was careful not to tell Sakura what was in the note. All she knew was that he had killed her cousins. Mizuki wanted to get his hands on the forbidden scroll, but knew that he didn't have the authorization to even enter the tower at night. Naruto however lived there and since he was on such good terms with the Hokage could easily get the scroll. And when he fetched it all he would have to do was take it from Naruto in an agreed spot and hide his body. He was even doing what the Harunos wanted in a way. He would frame the boy for the crime and the Harunos would be happy, and when he delivered the scroll to Orochimaru he would be elevated above all other servants. He smirked as he approached Naruto and told him how he could pass the exam. Naruto ran through the forest with the scroll attached to his back. He was to meet Mizuki up ahead and hand over the scroll. Then he would receive his headband and become a Konoha ninja. It was not that he particularly cared to become a ninja, but rather he knew that it would make the old man happy if he did. And that was a good thing. So he had stolen the scroll so that he could pass the makeup exam. It was strange that he had never heard of this test before, but he shrugged. What the hell? It never occurred to Naruto that the scroll on his back should never be removed from the Hokage's tower. Iruka followed Naruto through the forest, hoping to find out what the hell had happened. He had overheard Mizuki talking about a makeup exam with Naruto. Iruka was immediately suspicious but had not heard the specifics of the conversation. So he had followed Mizuki through the village in the hopes of asking, however his gut had told him to just follow. And his gut was rarely wrong. He had been surprised when he had seen Mizuki go into the forest just outside of the village. What the hell was going on, he wondered. He saw Mizuki come to rest in a slight clearing. Iruka hid on a branch of a nearby tree and listened carefully. He looked at Mizuki pace around the clearing. He should definitely not be this nervous about a makeup exam. Suddenly Mizuki let out a loud curse. "Where the hell is that brat with the forbidden scroll?" he snarled. Iruka breathing stopped. If Mizuki had sent Naruto to retrieve the forbidden scroll, then it meant he was going to frame Naruto for stealing it or was planning to steal it from Naruto and becoming a missing nin. Either option was not acceptable as Iuka drew his kunai and crept behind the soon-to-be traitor. He needed to be stopped before someone else got hurt. Naruto continued to run through the forest relishing the freedom. It was the first time that he had been able to enjoy such a feeling. He opened his mouth and felt the wind in his cheeks. He let out an ear-splitting yippee as he leapt above the canopy. Little did he know that it would be heard by two shinobi locked in fierce combat. Iruka leapt back as he felt the wind rush past his chest. He had just narrowly escaped an overheard strike by Mizuki's oversized shuriken. Mizuki had a sick grin on his face. Iruka cursed. He had only managed to lightly stab Mizuki's shoulder with his ambush. Before he had a chance to respond, a loud yippee echoed throughout the forest. They both knew that it was Naruto. Mizuki smirked as he turned and ran in the direction of the yell. Iruka cursed and followed. Naruto still had a huge grin on his face as he jumped from tree to tree, his chains holding the forbidden scroll. His grin suddenly disappeared as he saw a huge shuriken fly towards him. He jumped to the left, landed on the ground. He saw Mizuki running towards him. He also noticed Iruka behind him. There was killing intent radiating of both of them. The innocence faded away. The forbidden scroll fell from his back. His chains loosened and multiplied. A sick grin adorned his face. Mizuki loosened his second shuriken and attacked. He was too high on adrenaline to notice the change in his attitude. His ignorance did not last, however, as Naruto blocked his overhead strike with his left chain and used his right chain like a whip and smashed it into his chest. Mizuki coughed blood as he felt two of his ribs crack. The force of the blow sent him flying backwards. Mizuki bit back a curse and let his hands form a seal. Naruto sent his right-handed chain smashing down in the ground. Instead of crushing Mizuki, he smashed a log instead. His head whirled around and out of the corner of his eye he saw Mizuki charge at his back, kunai poised to strike. Before he could even react, a body jumped in front of the blow. Iruka had intercepted Mizuki and had taken the kunai and the gut. Mizuki cursed and threw Iruka aside. As he looked at Naruto again, all he saw was death. A demonic smile adorned his face as both his chains slammed into his arms. As the impact subsided, he felt the chains wrap around his upper arms. Mizuki attempted to kick Naruto away, but Naruto jumped and slammed both his feet into Mizuki's face. Suddenly Mizuki felt a crack and pain jolted through both his arms. Naruto had just broken both of his arms. Mizuki screamed as laughter was heard. Iruka opened his eyes as he looked at the battle. He had done all he could to save Naruto. He heard the sadistic laughter and fear gripped his chest. Had Mizuki won? He turned his head. The sight shocked him. There was Naruto, standing on Mizuki's chest. His chains were wrapped around his upper arms. And he was tearing Mizuki's arms off. Mizuki was beyond expressing pain. All he could do was scream wordlessly. Naruto's face was a picture of grim pleasure. What the hell was going on? His thoughts were brought to a standstill, however, when he heard a sickening tear. Naruto had ripped his arms off. Iruka blanched. Mizuki had fainted from the pain. Naruto's chains released his arms and he walked towards Iruka, chains flaring. Iruka just looked at him shocked. Naruto knelt down in front of him, and looked at him with a confused expression. "Why did you get hurt?" he asked. Iruka stared. What kind of question was that? "To save you," he replied. "Why?" Naruto responded. Iruka stared even more. What kind of question was that? What kind of childhood did he have that he needed a reason to save someone? He answered the only way he could. Because it was the right thing to do, was all he said. Naruto seemed to accept this and picked him up with his chains as well as his arms, as they both journeyed to the village, leaving the now dead Mizuki lying in the leaves. Several hours later, Sarutobi looked at Naruto. He had witnessed all that had occurred and had felt no sympathy at the fate of Mizuki. Ibiki would have probably done worse. Naruto had returned the Forbidden Scroll and had told him of Mizuki's actions. Sarutobi now sat back in his chair and thought about what to do. It was clear that he had at least Genin-level skills. He sighed and told Naruto to go into his room. Naruto nodded. Gone was his usual smile. He was deep in thought. Sarutobi rose and went to the hospital. He needed to know exactly what happened. The next day, Sarutobi sat down at his desk. Naruto and Iruka stood in front of him. He knew exactly what had happened between the two and thought he understood Naruto's confusion. He had never had a normal childhood. Locked in a cell for 12 years had imparted him a view of isolation from the world. In a way he cared for no one and nothing, despite his cheerful attitude. Iruka saving him had showed him how to care for others. And he was confused by these feelings. Normally the Hokage would be happy with this improvement, however the news of Naruto's violence had once again disturbed him. It appeared that the influence of the Kyuubi in the presence of killing intent grew, causing Naruto to grow violent. It appeared that while the chain seal sealed the rest of its chakra, it did nothing for its mental influence. Sarutobi sighed. He pitied the boy. The Hokage sighed and motioned for Iruka to give his news to Naruto. Naruto, in recognition of the efforts you displayed in apprehending and disposing of the traitor Mizuki, I have decided to award you with the title of Genin of Konoha. Naruto was stunned. Sarutobi grinned. Iruka smiled. And for the first time since the forest, Naruto let out an ear-splitting yippee. Naruto walked into the classroom with a huge grin on his face, his unique appearance drawing everyone's eyes. What they all noticed was the headband secularly fastened around his head. Some looked shocked, some disbelieving, but on the whole they were glad that he had passed. All but one, however, who had an expression of disbelief, shock, anger and fear. How did he survive? She thought to herself as she suppressed a shiver. He was indeed a foul beast in her eyes. Just as she was about to vent her anger by yelling at Naruto, Iruka walked in. He smiled at Naruto as he watched him take his seat. Now I am sure that you are all aware by now of Naruto's graduation. All that happened was that he took a makeup exam to pass due to his missing many of the earlier lessons. He said quickly, ahead of any questions he knew were coming. As he looked around he saw most of the class nodding and looking at Naruto. Naruto for his part just grinned. He had been ordered not to tell anyone what had happened. Sasuke turned his head slightly at Naruto and nodded. Naruto smiled right back. Iruka noted this exchange and smiled slightly. Naruto was the only one that could get him to open up like that. He shook his head. He was glad that those two were on the same team. Iruka cleared his throat and began to read out the teams. I will only give the three important ones, okay? Team 7 will consist of Sasuke Uchiha. He paused as every fangirl in the class waited with bated breath. Hinata Hyuga and Naruto Uzumaki, he finished as he heard several loud thumps. Looking up he saw several girls with foreheads on tables. He looked and saw Hinata smirking. If he didn't know better he would have thought that she was a fangirl. However, he did know better and knew that she was probably smirking because she had a strong ninja in her team. He groaned as he moved on. Team 8 will consist of Kiba Inuzuka, Shino Aburame and Sakura Haruno, while Team 10 will consist of Shikamaru Nara, Choji Akamichi, and Ino Yamanaka. Will all teams please wait for their Junin senseis? Iruka finished as he looked around the genin. Most were looking at their new teammates. He did however notice that Sakura was looking at Sasuke longingly and many fangirls were glaring at Hinata. Hinata for her part remained unconcerned. Naruto just looked at everyone, as he usually did. Iruka turned and walked to his desk to finalize some paperwork. Hinata looked over at her two teammates and felt a clash of emotions. These however were not the usual joy at being paired with the Uchiha. She despised fangirls. No, she was glad that she was paired up with a skilled shinobi. On the other hand there was Naruto. He was a strange one. She sensed there was something different about him and his chakra coils were unlike anyone else's. They ran through the chains and she was pretty sure that the chains ran through the body. Strange. Also he was totally nonchalant but she was sure that there's something else. Something dark. Hinata sighed. Was it a good thing that he was so unique and surprising or a bad thing that he was so confusing? Hinata sighed again. Sasuke looked at his two teammates. He couldn't have asked for more. First there was Hinata, she was not only a normal girl but also reasonably skilled. Then there was Naruto. Sasuke felt a kinship of sorts towards him. Although neither had had to say it, they both knew that they were alone in the world. Also Naruto seemed to treat him just like others. He neither loved him because of his clan nor hated him because of his attitude. He just treated him like everything else. That alone managed to turn Naruto into a friend. He smirked. It was not a bad day at all. Naruto was just happy that something different was happening. Kurenai went through the academy at a brisk pace. She was thinking about her team, and especially Hinata. They had met in a park where Hinata was picking flowers 4 years ago. Kurenai had wanted a break and had rested on the bench. She had noticed that the young Hyuga was crying and had gone over to comfort her. By the end of the afternoon, Kurenai had taken the role of surrogate older sister. For the next year they had continued to bond until 3 years ago. Hinata had just finished training under the supervision of her father. Needless to say, he had been disappointed in her. Kurenai knew this because that's what she had been told by Hinata. Then her father had gone to an emergency council meeting, and when he had returned had retired to his study. Hinata had gone to see her father some time later and had been surprised to see him drinking. The only other time he had ever drank spirits was when her mother had died. He had noticed her and had sighed. "You are such a disappointment, Hinata, nothing at all like your mother." He had told her and then had ignored her. Hinata had retired to her room and, from what she had told Kurenai, had resolved to become stronger to live up to her mother's memory. Admirable motives for what she had become. A typical Hyuga. Kurenai sighed as she walked in the classroom. She immediately picked out Hinata, who to her surprise seemed rather agitated. Kurenai mentally shrugged and called out, "Team 7, to the rear courtyard please," she commanded as she walked straight out the room. Upon leaving the room she immediately teleported to the rear courtyard and waited. Naruto grinned as he walked down the corridor with his teammates. He was excited about starting these missions. The old man had told him all about these when he was teaching him, and he was really excited about them. And even better, he was on a team with Sasuke. Naruto didn't know why, but he felt a sort of kinship with him. And he wasn't sure about Hinata. She had either ignored him in class or was staring at him intently with those weird eyes. He had turned to her and smiled when they had left the room, but she had just humped and attempted no conversation. Naruto shrugged and thought about what would happen next. They soon arrived at the rear courtyard. "So why don't we introduce ourselves to each other, your likes, dislikes and ambitions?" "You there go first," Kurenai started as she pointed at Sasuke. Sasuke nodded. "My name is Sasuke Uchiha. I have few likes as well as few dislikes, but I have an ambition, and that is to kill a certain man," was all Sasuke said. Kurenai nodded in understanding while her inner thoughts were disappointed. "So that's why the Hokage put him on my team instead of Kakashi. It was not because I would be a better teacher, but because I would be a worse teacher and his thirst for power would be stemmed," Kurenai inwardly thought. She pointed to Hinata, who nodded. "My name is Hinata Hyuga and my likes are flower ceremonies and training in my clan techniques. My dislikes are people who are confusing and people who do not try to better themselves. My ambition is to become worthy of my mother's legacy," she said calmly. Naruto looked at her strangely. Why would someone dislike confusing things? They were just more fun, that's all, he thought, while Kurenai just nodded. It was to be expected that she had molded herself after the Hyuga concept of a true ninja. She at last pointed to the blonde dressed in chains. "Your turn," she said. Naruto nodded and began his speech. "My name is Naruto Uzumaki and I like anything new. I dislike people trying to kill me and my dream is to have a dream," he said. The others just stared while Kurenai just smiled. Here was a strange one. At least he was cheerful though. Kurenai looked over at the other two and was pleasantly surprised. Although he had not said anything outrageous, just strange, it did have an impact on the others. Sasuke was smirking while Hinata looked at him with a confused look. He will be the one to bring this team together, Kurenai thought to herself as she clapped her hands. "Okay, now for your final test to become a genin. You will meet at training area 12 at 7 a.m. sharp for your instructions," she said quickly. Hinata, however, put up her hand. "Didn't I already pass the exam?" she asked. Kurenai sighed at her use of words. Typical Hyuga. They only thought about themselves. "That was a preliminary exam, this is the real thing. was all she said. The three nodded dejectedly. They had hoped that that was the end of it. Even Naruto looked slightly downcast. Kurenai chuckled as she left. Even the eternally cheerful were annoyed by another test. Naruto sighed. While he liked new things, even he did not like these tests. All well, at least after that he would get to go on some missions. Ever since the old man had told him about these missions, he had wanted to go on one. Now he had that chance. Naruto looked over at his teammates and remembered some of the things that the old man had told him about teamwork. Naruto himself was unused to working with other people or associating with other people. So he was unsure on how to react to his other teammates. He decided to take the initiative. "Does anyone want to get something to eat so that we can get to know one another?" he asked his two companions. Sasuke looked surprised but agreed easily. Hinata also agreed, but for a different reason. She wanted to figure out why Naruto acted the way he did. Why he was so laid back and said such profound things so casually. So they all searched for a place to eat. After a while the trio came across a ramen stand that appeared empty. Deciding that a quiet place to eat was the best bet, they sat down and ordered some ramen. The initial conversation was quite simple. "What does ramen taste like?" he asked the other two. They both just stared at him. Has he been living in a cave all his life or something? Sasuke and Hinata both thought. Their answer was interrupted, however, by the serving 3 bowls of miso ramen. Naruto picked up his chopsticks and started to eat. He was never one to waste a meal. It soon became apparent to Naruto that this was no ordinary food. The gods must eat this, he groaned in joy as he began to shovel down the ramen. The other two were in awe. How was it possible for someone to eat that quickly? They shook their heads. He was a mystery. As they were eating, they were approached by another 3 who had the same idea. This was Team 8. Sakura had seen the stand and had immediately noticed Sasuke and had insisted they go over. Kiba had said earlier that they should get something to eat to get to know each other, and the other 2, having nothing to do, have agreed. Kiba and Shino were now following an enthusiastic Sakura with second thoughts. They knew how scary fangirls were. Sakura had latched onto Sasuke's back and had insisted that it was fate that they should meet. Whether it was because it had been a good day up to that point or because that was the last straw, Sasuke had thrown her off his back and proceeded to educate her. "Listen, you stupid girl, I would not touch you if I were a leper and you were the last girl in the elemental countries," he said softly but harshly before turning back to his ramen. The others just stared. None, not even Naruto, could remember Sasuke saying that much in one sentence. Sakura looked at him in shock before turning to Naruto. "You have contaminated him, you murderer," she screamed. She felt tears welling up and got up and ran before anyone saw her cry. The others, however, were not stupid. Hinata decided to break the silence. "I pity you," she said to Kiba and Shino, who stared after her before shrugging and following Sakura. Sasuke turned to Naruto. "Murderer?" he inquired. Naruto shrugged. "Can't remember killing anyone she knew," he shrugged. The other 2 gaped. He had killed before. Just who the hell was he, was their collective thought. There were sides of Naruto that they were yet to see. Later, Naruto lay in his cell and thought about Sakura. Sarutobi had told him about families, but Naruto, having never had one, did not understand them. Why was someone upset over someone else dying? Why care? These thoughts rolled around his head as he remembered the council meeting 3 years ago. The Hyuga had asked him if he knew what it meant to be human. Even now he did not know the answer. He rolled over and closed his eyes as one last thought invaded his mind. This would be the last night he would be in this cell. Kurenai sat across from the Hokage. Sarutobi chuckled when she had told him her thoughts about her being assigned to that team. "You were assigned to that team because you were the most suited to help them with their mental state, not because you were a bad teacher," he had replied. She had looked at him strangely. The Hokage elaborated. "Those 3 are the most mentally unstable of the genin. Only you and Asuma have the ability to handle them, and Asuma would be too lazy to attempt to help them properly. Hinata needs to try to be more like herself and less like her perceived image of the clan, while Sasuke needs to learn that there is more to life than power. Naruto helped him to come out of his shell a little, but you will need to help. And then there's Naruto." The Hokage paused and sighed. Kurenai leaned forward. "Naruto has no sense of humanity," was all he said. Kurenai just stared. No sense of humanity, what did that mean? The Hokage picked up on her question and elaborated. He has no sense of love, hate, fear or envy. All he wants to do is try new things and he can only respond to others' emotions with the same. I have told him that anger and hate should not be responded to, but sometimes, well, you get the idea. Sarutobi explained. Kurenai sighed and rose to leave, her thoughts a tangled mess. As she was about to leave, Sarutobi interrupted her. Oh, I almost forgot about Naruto. The next morning, the three showed up at training area 12 to find Kurenai already waiting. Your task is simple. You will each be handed a scroll which has instructions on how to find another scroll which will have further instructions, and so forth. Kurenai handed them each scrolls. On each scroll there were of course instructions on how to find the next scroll. However, what was not known that they would be meaningless unless the right person read them. The areas discussed could only be recognized by people who had been there. One was in the Hyuga Manor, the other in the Uchiha clan yards, and the third in the cells of the Hokage Tower. She had been a little shocked when she had found out where Naruto had lived, but the Hokage had refused all her inquiries. It had helped a lot in her final decision. I will tell you now that these exams have a 33% failure rate, so try your best, she said as she watched the three open their scrolls and look at the contents before wandering off. This was not only a test of teamwork but of perception. Could they work out that another would be more suited for the task? She hoped that they would. Naruto looked at his scroll and wondered what the hell was being said. Among the scrolls of the Sharingan there lies your target. Second shelf 5 from the left. He wondered what that meant and thought about a place that had a lot of scrolls. Naruto then ran towards the library. He needed to be one of the two to win. Sasuke looked at his scroll and wondered what it meant. The dojo of the gentle fist is where the scroll shall be found. What kind of dojo practiced a gentle fist? He wandered off towards the library to see if there was any information. He needed to be the first. Hinata looked at her scroll. In the dark, where fool's blood has been spilled, under a circle of judges, where one has never been let out before. Hinata just shook her head. It sounded like a poem. She shrugged and thought about what she should do. She headed towards the library. There might be some information regarding poetry. She needed to win to live up to her mother's name. Kurenai looked at the three and smiled. They had similar thoughts. She just hoped that they would work out what she meant by 66. Naruto ran to the library as fast as he possibly could. He needed to pass. Naruto did not know what the hell was the Sharingan was, but he hoped that since there were scrolls at the library that there was a section called the Sharingan. Then the scroll would make sense. With the scroll firmly clasped in his chains he rushed towards the library. Sasuke ran towards the library as fast as he could. He needed to pass to continue his training. He needed to surpass his brother. Sasuke dragged his thoughts away from his brother and to the matter at hand. Sasuke wondered about the gentle fist. He had never heard of such a fighting style. How could a fist be gentle? He had recalled how the library had a map of the village with references that you would need to find certain areas. With that he should be able to find out where to go. Hinata looked at her scroll and wondered what the hell it meant. It had to be a poem of some sort. This test was obviously designed to test her reconnaissance skills and her ability to think independently. She hoped that the library had some resources available to interpret it. She was sure that it was not a code, so the only option left would be that it symbolized an area of the village. Hinata activated her Byakugan and searched the surrounding area for the library, as she was unfamiliar with its location. She soon however spotted something else. It was the Uchiha who seemed to also be heading somewhere in a hurry. A later inspection revealed it to be the library. Hinata decided to follow him. Only two would pass and she knew that she wanted him on the team more than Naruto. Perhaps they could work together. Naruto had arrived at the library only to find that there was no Sharingan section in the library. The nice woman behind the counter had told him however that the Sharingan was actually a bloodline limit that was available to the Uchihas. Naruto thought about that and decided to go find Sasuke. Even Naruto could work out that Sasuke would have the easiest time finding this. But weren't one of them meant to fail? Naruto thought about that. He then shrugged. If only he and Sasuke passed it would be fine. Naruto however did not need to look far as he heard a familiar voice say a not too familiar phrase. "What do you mean I can't see it?" he shouted. The guard had refused to let him in because he was not a recognized Konoha shinobi and there was sensitive information inside. Naruto was surprised when he looked around the corner and saw Sasuke shouting. What the hell was going on? Naruto decided to go see what was happening. Sasuke was definitely pissed off. He was an Uchiha. How could the guard believe that he was not a real shinobi? Just then he heard footsteps and he turned to see Naruto. In his chains were the scroll and a stupid grin on his face. A strange thought invaded Sasuke's mind. He had only ever seen Naruto with a smile or a confused look on his face. Even when Sakura had called him a murderer. Sasuke shrugged and put it down to Naruto being a strange person. "What do you want, Naruto?" he asked. Naruto just grinned as usual. "I heard you yelling and decided to see what was going on," he replied. Sasuke just sighed. Naruto's curiosity was insatiable. He did however decide to answer him. "I need to find a dojo that holds a gentle fist, but they won't let me into the map room." Sasuke seethed. Naruto nodded however in understanding even though he had no clue what was going on. However, there was one who did however. Hinata, who had been listening in on the conversation, was shocked to say the least. She knew exactly what the gentle fist was. But why was a scroll hidden in her family's dojo? There were easier places to hide the scroll that were just as effective. Hinata decided to wait and see what happened. Naruto listened to Sasuke and decided to tell Sasuke where his was. After all Sasuke had told him where his was. His reaction to say surprised Naruto. "But that's at my clan's library," was all he said as his mouth gaped and his eyes were wide. Naruto absorbed the information. Sasuke had a clan, which was surprising. Now that he thought about it, the old man had told him something about it in one of their lessons. Now that he thought about the lessons, there was something else that he remembered. "Hey Sasuke, I once remember the old man telling me that when I would be in a genin team I would have 2 teammates and a teacher. Do you think that he has changed his mind recently?" Naruto asked as he remembered some of the things that the old man had told him when he asked about being a ninja. Sasuke just stared. Now that he thought about it, he had also been told the same thing. Something strange was going on. Hinata, who was listening, was confused. She thought about what Kurenai had told her. And it hit her. These exams have a 66 failure rate, not the individual tests. Also, the scrolls were designed that only one of the 3 could find out the location. Hinata, proud of herself that she had worked that out, began to walk over to the 3. This would show them who was superior. As she walked over, the other 2 noticed she was approaching. Putting on a Hyuga look of arrogance, she told them her theory. When she was done, Sasuke nodded while Naruto grinned. "Well, let's open all our scrolls and see what's happening," Naruto said shortly after Hinata had finished. The other 2 nodded as they laid them down the floor. "We will go to the Hyuga Manor first," Hinata announced as they had finished. Sasuke looked at Naruto when he had finished reading Hinata's scroll. Naruto just grinned, which calmed Sasuke. Getting the Hyuga scroll proved ridiculously simple, as she had simply walked in while the other 2 waited outside and saw an unknown scroll at the base of the back wall with some others that contained the theory of the gentle fist. Ever since that night her father had told her the truth, she had trained constantly, becoming familiar with this dojo. The scroll had easy to find. Next had been in the library of the Sharingan and had been just as easy to find. It was the only one not covered in dust, as they had not been moved in years. As before, he had insisted that the other 2 remain outside as his search. Then came the poem, or what she thought was a poem. Since Naruto had been told that it was something only he would know, that only left one place. His cell. They arrived at E Tower, and the guard, recognizing Naruto and how he had traveled to and from his academy and cell, let him in instantly. He shuddered when he remembered that night. Although the room was clean, there was still a foreboding sense to that room. He only hoped the other 2 were prepared. Hinata looked at the cell and shook herself. So this was where Naruto lived. She shuddered. It was empty except for the bed on one wall. No desk, no pictures, nothing. Just emptiness. She glanced back at Sasuke, who obviously had the same thoughts. Just then her thoughts turned to the instructions given on the scroll. The circle of judges was obviously the council, who were above. But fool's blood. How was Naruto supposed to know about fool's blood? Her thoughts were then dragged to Sakura. "Naruto, have you killed anyone in here?" she asked suddenly. Sasuke's head whipped around and he stared at her. What kind of question was that, he thought to himself. Naruto, however, seemed unconcerned. "Yeah, 2 people tried to kill me while I was sleeping, so I killed them," Naruto said cheerfully. Hinata and Sasuke just stared. What the hell was he? However, neither could detect any falsehoods in his voice. He had told the truth. Just then a thought struck Sasuke. "Have you ever left your cell before you came to the academy?" he asked. Naruto just shook his head. The two stared. Similar thoughts ran through their heads. "Just what are you?" they both thought. Sasuke, however, saw Naruto in a new light. He was as confused as Hinata. Whereas before he thought that Naruto was just simple, now he knew that Naruto was someone who reacted differently to everyone else. The way that he had told them that he had killed people left Sasuke cold. Did he perhaps not know how to show mercy? Sasuke shuddered and was grateful that Naruto was the closest thing he had to a friend. Hinata was just mire confused. Why did he just smile all the time yet kill people without remorse? How could he be so vicious and cheerful at the same time? Hinata sighed. Was he even human? Kurenai looked at the three as they read all three scrolls together. They had left the Hokage's tower and were now in a nearby park. No doubt the three were wondering whether or not Naruto was human. They would soon find out that he was more and less human than most. Just as she had when the Hokage told her Naruto's story. She only hoped that he could help him. "They are all the same," Naruto said as the other two nodded. This proved Hinata's theory that they had to work together as a team to pass the exam. This scroll was simple to understand. "Come to Training Ground 12 for your final test," was all it said. All three nodded at one another and ran towards it. When they arrived, they noticed that Kurenai was already waiting. They stopped in front of her. "I'm glad that you found out the secret of the exam so quickly, congratulations. Now the only thing that you have to prove to me is that you will be able to survive as ninja," was all Kurenai said. The three looked at her with puzzled looks. Kurenai's face settled into an empty expression as she settled into a fighting stance. "Come at me," was all she said. The three rushed forward. Hinata let out a flurry of punches that Kurenai avoided by swaying back. As she leapt back, she threw a loose kick at Hinata, who easily blocked. As Kurenai recovered, Sasuke came in from the left while Naruto from the right. Sasuke aimed a kick to Kurenai's head while Naruto loosened his chains and sent them towards her legs. Kurenai, however, expected this and had already started performing the seals for the substitution jutsu. All Naruto and Sasuke struck was a log. Kurenai then aimed at Hinata. Hinata had already stopped from her initial attack and was looking for Kurenai. Hinata, who had not yet activated her Byakugan, noticed Kurenai of the corner of her eye. She spun and threw a kunai at Kurenai, who merely vanished. "Genjutsu," she said in horror, realizing her mistake. Kurenai was actually behind her. Not having the time to turn, or even move, Hinata tensed, anticipating the strike. But it never came. Naruto and Sasuke launched at Kurenai from in front of her. Kurenai in response leapt back from the two. She was however surprised at Naruto's lack of ferocity. She had expected him to respond more to violence. This however was not the time to investigate these things. "Enough," Kurenai shouted. The three stopped. Kurenai smiled. "It appears that you have what it takes to be ninja," she continued. The three stared. What the hell was she on about? Kurenai smiled at their looks and continued. "That test was not to test your combat abilities, but rather your ability to act as a team under combat situations. You all attacked in tandem and more importantly you defended your teammate. As it stands, I have no choice but to pass you, congratulations," was all she said. The three looked at her for a minute before Naruto jumped into the air. "I get to be a ninja. I get to be a ninja," was all that was heard around the village. Sasuke just smirked while Hinata just huffed at Naruto's antics. In her mind there had never been any doubt. "You are dismissed for today. Meet me here at 8 o'clock sharp tomorrow." "Oh, and Naruto, could you stay behind for a moment?" Kurenai said to the three. Hinata and Sasuke nodded while Naruto just stared at her. Kurenai cleared her throat. Kurenai wondered how she was going to say this. She decided to bite the bullet. "As from today, you are going to be living with me," she said calmly, which belied the turmoil of emotions that was inside of her. She knew that she needed to help him, but she was still nervous. "Sure," was all he said in response, which surprised her. There was no fear or hesitation. Only a desire to try something new. She remembered back to what the Hokage had said, and how he did not know how to be human. He could not fear, so he could not be nervous. It also explained his lack of violence earlier. Since Kurenai was not intent on killing them, neither was Naruto serious about hurting her. It was certainly strange. Kurenai, however, had no time to contemplate these thoughts as they walked to her apartment. She was too busy trying to discover just what Naruto's tastes were. Sasuke walked back to his home as he thought about the day. He had passed the test and was now a shinobi, but he thought back to when they were in the cell. It still made him shudder when he thought about that, as well as Hinata's scroll and what it meant. He was a little scared of Naruto after he left his cell. The blood on the walls had not been properly cleaned off, and he saw that it was not recent. He wondered why the blood had not been cleaned off the walls. And also how that Naruto did not care about killing them. He thought back to the poem and remembered the line about Naruto and how he had never been let out before. Just then a thought struck him. Naruto had told Hai that he had no parents or family once in class, and if he had been alone in the dark since his birth. Sasuke shuddered. Does he even know what it means to be human? He murmured aloud to himself while several passerbys looked at him strangely. Hinata sat in her room and thought about the day. The mystery that was Naruto seemed to get all the more confusing. On the one hand, there was a cheerful boy wrapped in chains that smiled a lot and was borderline hopeless in a fight, while what she had seen today contradicted that. Hinata thought back to the cell and remembered that the council would have had to have known that he was there. She decided to speak with her father about it. Hinata entered her father's study to see him reading some papers. He looked up as she entered. "What is it, Hinata?" he asked her as he looked up. "Father, I want to know about one Uzumaki Naruto," was all she said. Hiyashi just looked at her and sighed before motioning her to sit down. Hinata took the chair directly in front of Hiyashi. Hiyashi had been briefed by Kurenai when she had organized to have the scroll placed in the dojo as to where the other scrolls were to be placed, so he could guess what she was referring to. Naruto is not a normal boy. As you may have found out, he has lived in a cell for most of his life with little or no human contact. In short, he is unaware on how to be human. Hiyashi sighed. Even he felt pity for the boy. Hinata was however shocked. But he was always smiling, laughing. How could he not be human? She questioned in return to Hiyashi's statement. Hiyashi just nodded in return. It is his curiosity. Since he has only been in a cell for most of his life, he has a thirst for anything new. His desire to be a ninja is just so that he can do something new. Hiyashi's voice faded away as Hinata just sat there shocked. What kind of person was he? No mercy, hate or love, she murmured to herself. That was all he was. Can he kill a person? She asked. Hiyashi mirthlessly chuckled. From what I know, he will respond with base instinct to killing intent. He answered. Kill or be killed, she murmured quietly. Hiyashi nodded. Even Hiyashi was slightly cautious of Naruto after that night. Hinata rose to leave and returned to her room, her thoughts in turmoil. What was Naruto? Someone thirsty for knowledge, who responded to violence with base instinct, who had no idea how to be human. Hinata sighed. Kurenai entered her apartment arm loaded with bags. She had found out that Naruto had eaten ramen the previous night and had acquired a taste for it. And when he had found out how many different types of ramen were available, he was on cloud 9. Kurenai smiled. His actions towards Hai teammates had encouraged her. And he obviously felt a friendship with Sasuke, who seemed to return the sentiment as well. Naruto looked around the apartment as Kurenai directed him towards the kitchen. Naruto, whose chains were loose, placed the bags on the counter before allowing his chains to wrap around him again. Kurenai noticed how he wrapped his chains around himself whenever possible and wondered if it was a defense mechanism against new things. He always wrapped himself up in chains whenever possible. If he was always so confident because he always had his chains around him. Like a steel teddy bear. Kurenai grinned at the thought. Naruto looked at her in confusion at the expression on her face, and she just shook her head. Shower time for you, she said as she directed him towards the bathroom. Naruto obediently done as she ordered. He soon came to a room he had never seen before. What is this place? He asked as he looked around. He had never seen such a place. Kurenai just smiled at his confusion. The Hokage had given her a complete rundown of his lifestyle to prepare Kurenai. This included his bathing habits, which was a bucket which was placed in his cell every night. Even when he had started going to the academy, the habit had been so ingrained that he still did it. Kurenai sighed. It was her job to break him out of his institutionalized state. Kurenai turned her back and instructed him to strip. He complied without hesitation. Without looking, she turned on the shower and pointed. Step in the shower, Get that white bar on your left and use it to rinse yourself, she instructed as she looked at the wall. It took a while, but she heard the rattle of chains. Kurenai smiled. Even if it was out of necessity, the comfort mechanism had been removed. Even if it was just for the shower. Later that night, dinner had been a quiet affair. Kurenai had decided to give him some ramen for his first dinner to help him settle in, and had decided that some table manners were in order. His manners were atrocious. Kurenai had led him to the bed and he had soon fallen asleep. As she had looked over his resting form, she saw him still huddled up in chains. Kurenai sighed. Perhaps they have longer to go than she thought. In the Hokage's office, Sarutobi looked through his crystal ball at Naruto's faring. He saw Kurenai's shoulders slump and chuckled. Naruto could sense intentions really well and would soon realize that Kurenai would want to help him. He deactivated the crystal and leaned back. It had been a long night, but worth it. Naruto's healing had begun. Naruto and company stood in front of the Hokage's desk, awaiting orders. It was the day after their genin exam and they were all rather excited about their first mission. Sasuke was envisioning some sort of border patrol, while Hinata figured since she was a Hyuga and Sasuke was an Uchiha, they would probably get a bodyguard assignment or something of equal importance. Naruto just wanted something fun to do. Kurenai looked at her 3 charges and suppressed a grin at their expectant looks. She knew that she shouldn't, but there was some pleasure to be gained from watching a genin team complete their first mission. As Kurenai glanced at the Hokage, she smirked at his expression. It seemed that he had the same idea. Your first mission will be, the Hokage said calmly before pausing for dramatic effect. The whole team leaned forward. To clean out the Inuzuka kennels, he finished. 2 of them just let their jaws drop while Naruto just smiled. He had of course not heard about the Inuzuka kennels. At the kennels, Hinata and Sasuke looked around at the kennels once again with disgusted looks on their faces. They had been at it for 2 hours and only now was it beginning to look clean. Sasuke looked around in disgust, trying to figure out exactly how this helped him in getting stronger. Hinata could only mutter about how beneath her this was. Even the eternally cheerful Naruto seemed a little put down, as instead of his customary grin, all there was a neutral expression on his face. Kurenai looked at her 3 students with an amused glance. These tasks were an important lesson for both Sasuke and Hinata. It gave them a clear message that they were not above everyone else. For Naruto, the mission had a simple purpose: to piss him off. Since Naruto did not know what human emotions were, he had to be forcefully introduced to some of them. Anger was one of them. Of course they were not trying to truly anger him, but just annoy him a little. And it did seem to be working. His expression was one of rare neutrality. Kurenai decided that was enough and called them to a halt before telling them to take a break before continuing. Naruto and Sasuke went off in one direction while Hinata went in another. Kurenai sighed. She was supposed to be friends with her teammates, not ignore them any chance she got. As the 3 disappeared, she sat on a crate and wondered what she could do. It seemed that he did indeed have a ready capacity for emotions, as displayed in this exercise, and how quickly he got annoyed. It was just that he needed to experience them. The other 2, however, were a problem. Sasuke just needed to learn to trust others. From what she had seen and heard, he just refused to let others in. All she needed was to convince him that he could trust others. All that she could do with that was use patience and kindness. It was Hinata that was a real problem. Hinata seemed to think that she was better than everyone else and that they were beneath her notice. Kurenai was not sure how to deal with her. She knew that it wasn't as simple as getting Sasuke or Naruto to defeat her in combat. What Hinata had was an absolute confidence in her clan rather than herself. In her there was very little self-confidence. Kurenai had to somehow change her view of other people. Kurenai thought back what Sarutobi had told her. That she was the only one that could help them mentally. Even if Kakashi was a better teacher for Sasuke for techniques, she would be a better help for his mental state. And he needed to get Sasuke's mental state in order before he should learn in serious jutsu. Or so she had been told. However, Kurenai had her doubts about how well she could help them. Kurenai sighed and leaned back. She would think about it more that night. Hinata thought about that mission she was doing. These weren't missions worthy of a Hyuga. Hinata gritted her teeth. Her clan was above this. She spied a sushi bar and decided that she needed something to take her mind of the mission. Tonight she would talk to her father about this insult to her clan. Hinata headed inside. Sasuke and Naruto walked around the village, wondering what to eat. Or to be accurate, Sasuke was considering where they could eat while Naruto had already had his heart set on ramen. It seemed that he had developed a rather intense taste for it. He had begged for it ever since they had left the kennels. Sasuke sighed and gave to Naruto's begging. They would go for ramen as Sasuke could think of nothing better to do. Naruto, his taste for ramen temporarily sated, thought about his mission today. While he had been excited about going on a mission, he had soon been disappointed with what he had to do. Which was strange as he had never felt like this before. The old man had told him about emotions and that was how he knew that he was disappointed, but this was a first. Naruto remembered the previous night when Kurenai told him that he could ask her anything. He had sensed in her the emotion he felt from the old man. He decided to ask her about it that night. Several hours later, the trio were finally done with the cleaning. Hinata and Sasuke wore identical expressions of annoyance, while Naruto had an expression of adjacent wonder combined with fear. All four waited as Sume, the Inuzuka clan, had inspected their work. Not bad, for rookies anyway, she pronounced. All three just sighed. Even Naruto sighed. To them it looked spotless. Kurenai just suppressed a grin. She had asked Sume earlier to say that so that they would not arrogant. The truth was that it was an excellent job. Kurenai nodded and the three and they bowed to Sume before leaving. As soon as they were out the door, Sume allowed herself a small chuckle. That Kurenai is a cunning one, she thought. At the Hokage's office, Sarutobi looked at the three genin as they walked into his office. He had chosen the worst D-ranked mission that he could find and was looking forward to when they returned. He was not disappointed as three ragged genin walked in. Hinata and Sasuke were the first two in, each having a look of disgust on their faces, while Naruto and Kurenai followed. Naruto with a tired look while Kurenai had a slight smile. Sarutobi would ask her about the details after the genin had left. Team 7 reporting, mission accomplished. Kurenai said briskly. The three stood to attention behind her. Sarutobi nodded and dismissed the three genin and Kurenai turned to the three. Report for mission 7 o'clock in the morning tomorrow at training 12 tomorrow. She ordered. They all nodded. Kurenai decided to hide the fact that she lived with Naruto from the others now for fear that they would think that she favored Naruto above them. All nodded and walked out the door. Kurenai turned to the Hokage. So, any developments, he asked. Kurenai nodded. Yes, it appears that Naruto is still susceptible to emotions, and his time at the academy was helpful as it gave him a wide range. And at the Inuzuka kennels he was becoming frustrated and the beginnings of anger, Kurenai said. Sarutobi frowned. I don't want his first pure emotion to be anger, Sarutobi said softly. Kurenai nodded. From what you have told me about his night with Mizuki, he has no concept of friendship, even with the Uchiha. In regular people's actions they would be nothing more than acquaintances. What I would recommend is that he be forced to make a decision to save Sasuke. Sasuke is probably the only one he would try to save if anyone. And it would show Sasuke true friendship, and open his heart a bit more. Kurenai said calmly. Sarutobi rested his chin in his hands for a while. I will consider it, he said after a while. Kurenai just nodded. While she hated to force Naruto into such a situation, it was her only foreseeable option. Kurenai nodded as she left. That night at Kurenai's apartment, Kurenai sat at the table with Naruto as they ate their dinner quietly. Kurenai did notice that his chains were slightly looser than the night before. The Hokage had told her that the guard changed every night, so she assumed that since she was there when he went to sleep and when he woke up helped him trust her. The thought hardened her. He still treated her nearly the same as everyone else though. Somewhere between everyone else and the Hokage. Kurenai smiled as they finished their meal. She was closer to him now than before. Even if it was only a little. 1 week later. This is dark, in position, Sasuke whispered into his headpiece. This is lavender, in position, Hinata whispered as well. This is sunshine, ready to go, Naruto said after a pause. Okay. Now, Kurenai ordered after hearing all three report their positions. Sasuke charged at the shadow which deftly jumped back. Hinata charged when it landed but it dodged to the side, much to Hinata's disdain. Now Naruto, Sasuke yelled. Naruto charged, his chains descending on the landing shadow. RAAWWWR. came a distinctly feline sound as Naruto's chains wrapped around its torso. The cat was caught. This did not, however, stop the cat's violence. Soon the two were locked in combat as the other three just looked on in amazement. At the Hokage's tower, Naruto looked at the cat and felt another strange emotion. He had only felt this once before. He had a strange sense of satisfaction when he saw the cat being tortured by the fat lady. He noticed he had a strange smirk on his face. His teammates noticed it too. Hinata and Sasuke just nodded in understanding while Kurenai just smiled. He was one step closer to his emotions. The Hokage, however, did not share their optimistic viewpoint. While he was one step closer to his emotions, they were his darker emotions. Recalling Kurenai's advice, he searched through his stack of missions. Then one caught his eye. Okay, since you have done well on your previous missions, I am assigning you a C rank mission, Sarutobi said calmly. Hinata and Sasuke, who assumed that a C rank mission was because of their skills, were thrilled that their skills were finally being recognized. Kurenai, who knew the real reason, however, was pleased that her advice was being taken. You are to protect a bridge builder on his journey to his home country, was all Sarutobi said. They all nodded as the Hokage motioned one of the waiting Anbu to usher the man in. With him being a bridge builder, they were expecting a scholarly man. What they got was an old overweight drunk. Who are these brats? Are you sure they are ninja? The old man bellowed. This statement immediately put Hinata and Sasuke into a very pissed off mood. How dare that fool think that I am not good enough to be a ninja? Does this fool even know what clan I belong to? Hinata fumed silently. What an idiot, Sasuke murmured to himself more than anyone else. It was Naruto, however, who broke the silence. And how would you know? He asked with genuine curiosity. He felt no malice towards the drunk, merely curiosity. Tazuna coughed at the question. He actually had no idea what made a ninja. The other two nodded in agreement with Naruto's question, which Hinata took as sarcasm, while Sasuke knew Naruto actually wanted to know. Let's move on, shall we? Kurenai interrupted, seeing where this was going. The bridge builder cleared his throat. I am the super bridge construction expert Tazuna, and I expect you to provide me with super protection. He yelled. Naruto just laughed. You're funny, he said in response. Tazuna just sighed. How could the blonde not be impressed? At the Konoha gates. Let's go, Naruto yelled to his teammates. They just looked at him in annoyance. Hinata, Kurenai and Sasuke had worked out that Naruto got louder and more excited he became. This was to be expected. Sasuke and Hinata to the front, Naruto and I will be behind, Kurenai ordered. They all got into their positions and began their journey. Some hours later, Naruto had finally calmed down from his initial joy of leaving the village, much to his teammates and Tazuna's relief. As they walked, Naruto was looking at all his surroundings in awe. Kurenai looked at Naruto with a concerned look. She was not really concerned with him but rather what he could do. The Hokage had told her just how sensitive Naruto was to violence. This mission was to help him with his lighter emotions. This was also why she had positioned him next to her in hope that she could stop him. Then something to the left caught her eye. Naruto felt it. Like a shiver up his spine or a cold sweat down his back, it crept up into his mind. He could no longer hold it in. A feral grin adorned his features. Hinata and Sasuke heard the distinct sound of metal on metal and turned to see two ninja rushing Kurenai and Naruto. What surprised them even more was the expression on Naruto's face. Gone was the cheerful face, in its place was a vicious grin full of malice. His chains free, his body turning. Sasuke could not help, he was rooted in shock. Hinata just stood there biting her bottom lip. Her eyes were wide and her breathing heavy. Oh my, was all she said. Naruto turned his bloodlust in full flight. He ducked the chains the enemy ninja launched at him and sent his Chang racing towards them. The chains then began to rotate, coming out of his stomach and into his wrist. Both chains connected with his chest and waist, tearing them up. The foreign ninja felt the chains and launched himself to the right, away from his companion. Naruto, however, was not finished. His left chain formed a lasso and attached itself to the ninja's neck, while the right slammed him into the ground. His eyes began to bulge while he made strangling noises. Naruto just grinned as he just pulled, not squeezed. First the skin began to tear. Then the neck muscles. And finally the spine. The other two genin looked on in astonishment. They had never expected that Naruto would be capable of such violence. Sure, they had heard Sakura and had seen his cell, but this was beyond their comprehension. They had never seen such violence, even Sasuke with the slaughter of his clan. They saw the head finally ripped off the body, and Naruto turned to the other ninja. This ninja, however, was not a threat to anyone. Caught in a deadly genjutsu, all he could do was clutch his head in fear with Kurenai standing behind him, kunai drawn. She grabbed him by the hair and placed the kunai at his throat. "Who were you after?" was all she said. The ninja turned his head slightly and shuddered. "Will you make it stop?" he pleaded. Kurenai nodded. He pointed a shaky hand at Tazuna. Kurenai flipped the kunai and struck Hin in the back of the head. He fell to the ground. Kurenai looked at Naruto and saw the corpse. This was also the first time she had seen the results of Naruto's bloodlust. Naruto just stood there and was sniffing his cloths, which had been splattered with blood. "How do you get blood out of cloths without soap?" he asked. Kurenai, however, just resolved to aid him even more in light of his actions, as the Hokage's words proved true. He really did feel no remorse. Sasuke just stared in surprise. He now knew that Naruto hardly felt any emotions, but this was something else. The sheer indifference shocked him just as much as Naruto's dominance in the fight. Was this what he needed to kill Itachi? Hinata stared at Naruto, seeing him in a new light. How could I not have seen it, she thought to herself. The Hyuga valued indifference, and he took it to extremes. His nonchalance at killing the ninja was something that most Hyuga could only emulate, preferring to get over it in private. And when she had seen that feral look on his face, she had felt exhilarated. I had to get to know him better, she thought silently. Kurenai glared at Tazuna after she had secured the enemy ninja. Tazuna paled. Why were they targeting you? She asked after a minute. I don't know, he managed after a minute. Kurenai drew closer. You lie, she whispered. He tried to scramble back, but Kurenai bent over and grabbed his shirt. Why were they after you? She said softly. Tazuna just shrugged. The mission guidelines that you proposed to the village stated that we were to protect you from bandits. Now that they are missing Nin, this has gone from a C rank to at least a B rank, depending on what else is coming. So what going on? Depending on your answer, we may have to leave you here. Kurenai continued. Tazuna paled. Well, they are after me because I happen to be building has attracted the attention of some super powerful people who don't want the bridge built. I come from a poor country which does not have the money to afford a B rank or higher mission. Tazuna said and paused as Kurenai released him and stood up. While your reasons are understandable, they are not acceptable. I will have to think about it, was all she said to Tazuna as she turned to the three genin. In truth, it was just to let him down more softly than usual, as she had no intention of putting her genin Tam through a B rank mission at this stage. We are going back to the village, she informed her team. They all looked disappointed, but it was Naruto who spoke up above everyone else. But it would be no fun if we went home now, was all he said. The other two nodded for different reasons. Hinata wanted to prove herself to her mother's legacy, while Sasuke wanted to test his strength. Naruto just wanted to do something new. Kurenai looked at the three and shook her head. They all wanted to stay for their own reasons, and she did feel pity for the man and his country. Whatever, she said in exasperation. Two smirks and a grin greeted this. Kurenai turned to Tazuna. We will escort you to Wave and will guard you until your bridge is complete, Kurenai told him. Tazuna heaved a sigh of relief. Several hours later, the Konoha ninja and Tazuna sat quietly in a boat while a boatman steered it silently into a quiet inlet. Who is the person responsible for your troubles? Kurenai asked Tazuna in a low voice. Tazuna huffed and looked out into the mist. It's a man named Gato. He has a vested interest in this. He has hired a mercenary army, and with it he has seized control of the country's trade. All trade must go through him, and with that power he has imposed vicious tariffs. We are being bled dry. This bridge will free up trade and allow us to bypass Gato. However, since I am the only man in Wave now who is able to design and build the bridge, he now wants to kill me. He has hired ninja to kill me, so my only option was to also hire ninjas. And that's where you come in, Tazuna explained softly, his voice an echo of despair. The Konoha nin looked on silently before Naruto spoke up. Why don't you just kill him? Naruto asked. Tazuna just looked at him. How? He replied. Kurenai just stopped Naruto, who was about to tell Tazuna all about how to kill someone. It saddened Kurenai that he was so willing to see death. "Here you go," the boatman said suddenly as they approached land. "Thanks," Tazuna whispered as they got off and continued through the marsh, their thoughts a maze. "Down!" Kurenai screamed suddenly as a massive sword was hurled at them. All the genin ducked while Kurenai tackled Tazuna to the ground. The sword lodged itself into a tree and a large man appeared on the handle. Kurenai rose and stared hard at the man. "Zabuza of the demon mist, I presume," Kurenai stated. Zabuza looked at her and chuckled. "I am unfamiliar as to who you are, but you do appear to be skilled. If you would be so kind as to hand over the old man?" Zabuza asked. Kurenai just settled into a fighting stance. "You three protect Tazuna," she ordered. They immediately surrounded him. Kurenai's eyes had never left Zabuza as he removed his sword from the tree and landed some distance in front of her. "Guess I had to go through you first," he growled as he performed some hand seals. "Kirigakure no jutsu," Zabuza said as a thick mist covered the area. Kurenai cursed. This was the worst kind of opponent she could face. She could not perform genjutsu if she could not see him. Suddenly a dark voice echoed across the clearing. "The larynx, spine, liver, lungs, jugular vein, kidney, heart, so many targets," Zabuza's voice echoed across the clearing. Sasuke began to shiver. It had been a long time since he had felt such intense fear. Not since the Uchiha massacre. He turned and saw that Hinata was in a similar condition. Naruto, however, was different. His face was once again adorned with that same feral grin, his chains loose, and his eyes looking all over the place. Kurenai noticed as she noticed the distinct sound that the chains made when passing through skin. "Shit," she cursed softly. What she didn't want was Naruto losing control in this fight. Zabuza, however, saw Naruto's expression and chuckled. "This one looks promising. I haven't seen his like in a long time," Zabuza said, his voice containing a chuckle. He then landed just in front of Tazuna. "Now you die," was all he said. His blade was stopped, however, by a chain. Zabuza turned to see a young blonde with a demonic grin launch a second chain at his. Zabuza, however, ducked the chain and sent a vicious kick to Naruto's chest that even his chains could not block. Naruto flew backwards as he spat out a little blood. His face did not, however, lose its grin. It only seemed to get more vicious. Zabuza made no attempt to retreat into the mist, he was having too much fun. Naruto charged once again. Zabuza, however, had his sword ready and slashed vertically down at Naruto's shoulder. Naruto brought his chains up and to intercept the attack, however Zabuza adjusted the angle of the blow and slashed him across the chest. Naruto once again found himself falling back as he saw his blood cascade out of his chest. Kurenai intercepted Zabuza's follow-up and they were in a stalemate. Hinata and Sasuke both looked at Naruto's falling form. Naruto's felt a darkness descend as his eyes closed. He soon opened them to find himself in a dark corridor. He looked around and noticed that he was alone. Naruto rose and decided to walk down the corridor. He soon arrived at a large room that held at one end huge iron gates. He noticed that they were slightly open. Naruto approached. When he peered inside, he found that there was a red-headed woman wrapped in chains who just looked straight back at him. "Who are you?" he asked. She smiled. "My name is Kyuubi," was all she said. Sakura wandered around the village, her thoughts alternating between two boys. One of which was Sasuke, while the other was Naruto. She wondered what she had done to Sasuke to make him feel that way. Had she not shown him absolute devotion and love? The only possible conclusion was that Naruto had somehow contaminated Sasuke. Her thoughts then turned to Naruto. That cocky grin has always offended her, and how dare he be allowed to pass? It was all proof that the Hokage gave him special treatment. How else could he have murdered her cousins and gotten away with it? Her only conclusion was that Naruto had also contaminated the Hokage. Sakura had decided to end the day that Sasuke had accidentally yelled at her to end the contamination that was Naruto. It had taken her nearly a week to get the courage to ask her mother what she should do in regards to this, and her mother had immediately told her that she would solve the problem of Naruto and Sasuke. Sakura was not sure that it would work, but she trusted her mother, which led her to what she was doing now. Her mother had told her that she had organized for her to meet someone who would help her with this problem. Sakura continued down the road and soon spotted the building she was supposed to go in. Sakura approached the door and entered. All there was inside was a counter on the far side with an unremarkable woman behind it and a door to the side. Sakura approached the counter and pulled out the scroll that her mother gave her. I was told that I was supposed to come here," she said to the woman behind the counter, who took the scroll and read over it before motioning her through the door and pressing a button. She walked through the door and soon saw the descending steps. When she got to the bottom, she found that there was a masked Anbu waiting. The masked Anbu did not say a word and motioned her to follow. They soon arrived at a door in which the Anbu opened and ushered her in. Inside there was an old man with one arm and an eye patch. She looked at him nervously as he just stared at her. "Sit down," he finally said, motioning to a chair. Sakura sat down silently. "Your mother has told me that you have made up your mind to eradicate the one called Naruto, a scourge of this village," he stated. Sakura could only nod. He continued, "At your current level you have no hope for achieving your goals. Now since this is something that is of great benefit to the village, I am willing to aid you. Your mother has asked me to train you in this endeavor, so are you willing to do this?" he asked. Sakura could not believe her luck. "Of course," she replied, her earlier nerves forgotten at the thought of finally taking retribution on Naruto for his crimes. The old man nodded. "You will be contacted in the near future about training," he finished. He motioned her to leave, but Sakura stayed. "Well?" he asked. "How should I address you?" Sakura returned. The old man thought for a moment. "You may call me Danzo," he replied. Sakura said her thank yous and left. Wave, Naruto's mindscape. Naruto looked at the bound smiling woman and wondered what the hell he should do. He didn't know where he was, or who this Kyuubi girl was. On the plus side, he was slightly curious as to where was. He had of course never been here before, so all in all Naruto was having a little fun, even if he was a bit confused. "Who are you?" he asked again. "Kyuubi," she said again. "Who is Kyuubi?" he asked. "Me," she replied. Now by this time Naruto was a little peeved. He really wanted to find out who she was, and where he was for that matter, but he had the feeling that it would be answered as well. The lady chuckled. "Think about it. Where have you heard the word Kyuubi before?" the woman said. Naruto thought about it. "Well, Iruka said once that there was a big fox called Kyuubi, but you're not a fox, so." Naruto left the statement unfinished as he saw the smirk widen into a feral grin. "You're kidding?" Naruto asked, disbelief evident on his face. The woman, now revealed to be Kyuubi, shook her head. "Wow, I get to meet a demon, cool," Naruto said in an exuberant voice. Kyuubi shook her head in wonder. Not the reaction she was expecting, although she should have in light of his childhood and her influence. Naruto however interrupted her musings with another question. "Where are we?" he asked. Kyuubi shook her head. Had they told him nothing? "Where in your mindscape?" she replied. "My what?" he queried. "Your mindscape, in your head," Kyuubi reiterated. Naruto nodded, partly understanding. Kyuubi noticed his confusion and decided to elaborate. "I am inside you, and since you passed out due to the damage you received, you entered your mind, and here we are." Kyuubi finished her explanation. Naruto nodded in understanding. Then another question popped up. "Why are you in chains?" he asked. Kyuubi sighed. "Did you notice that our chains are the same? That is because of a binding seal that was placed on us. The spirit binding seal usually places a spirit and a person in the same body. The person who applied this seal however modified it so that it would work on demons such as myself. But it was obviously flawed as well because the chains should not show on you, only me." Kyuubi explained before chuckling. "Two seals that were corrupt to hold me in." She continued. "Two?" Naruto asked. Kyuubi head motioned to the gates. "That's another one, they should be closed." She answered. Naruto looked at the gates and nodded. "So how do I get out?" he asked. "You wake up," she said. Naruto looked around, wondering exactly how he was supposed to accomplish this. In the real world, locked in a stalemate, Kurenai stared into Zabuza's eyes. She had only one opportunity to finish quickly and attend to Naruto. Kurenai decided to break the stalemate. She pushed herself back and immediately began forming seals. "Jigoku Koka no Jutsu," Kurenai muttered. Zabuza felt a tremendous heat and looked up. "Shit, she cast that quickly," he muttered. He dashed to the side and once again fixed his eyes on Kurenai, who charged at his. He struck Kurenai in the waist and was surprised to see it disappear in smoke. "A clone," he muttered before he felt tree limbs constrict around his arms and legs. Fuck, he muttered again. Zabuza looked up to see Kurenai draw a kunai. He struggled to get free as Kurenai drew closer, death clear in her eyes. Zabuza braced himself for the impact of the kunai, which never came. Two senbon had pierced his neck. Kurenai looked startled as she watched Zabuza fall to the ground and she released her genjutsu. Kurenai knelt down and checked his pulse. Dead, she muttered as she rose, spotting a hunter nin perched in a tree. Well? Kurenai asked. She had noticed the hunter was from Kiri. I was sent to find and eliminate Zabuza. You don't mind that I finished the jib, do you? The hunter asked. Kurenai shook her head. As long as he was dead it did not matter. The hunter nodded before she shushined next to Zabuza and lifted him onto its shoulder. I will be going now, was all the hunter said as she disappeared. Now that the danger was over, the Konoha ninja just let out a long breath. Even Sasuke and Hinata, who had done nothing, were relieved that it was over. Kurenai walked over to Naruto, checked his wounds before lifting him up into her arms, the other two watching curiously. Let's go, she ordered the other three. Tazuna had no choice but to follow the orders of another strong woman. He was used to it though. Several hours later, Naruto awoke to a cool breeze touching his face. As he opened his eyes he noticed he was not resting on grass but rather in a bed. His chains had wrapped themselves around him once again. Naruto looked down at his chest and noticed that there was no wound, or even a scar. He sat up on the mattress and looked out the window. He could see a large body of water. What's that? He wondered to himself as he walked to the window. To Naruto it was a strange sight seeing that much water. Must be that ocean thing that the old man talked about, he thought to himself. Naruto turned and saw a young woman with long black hair enter the room. You're awake, she exclaimed when she saw him staring out the window. Naruto smiled at meeting someone new. I'm Naruto, nice to meet you. What's your name? He asked and the woman giggled. My name is Tsunami, and it's nice to meet you too, she replied with a smile before continuing. Your friends are downstairs, you have been asleep for over an hour since you got here, you know, she continued. Naruto just nodded as he walked down the stairs with Tsunami. When he reached the bottom, Naruto saw that his team, Tazuna, and a small boy were sitting around a table eating dinner. Kurenai was the first to notice them. You're awake, she said with a smile at Naruto, who grinned in response. Hinata just looked at him strangely, while Sasuke just did a half wave. Tsunami, acting the mother hen, directed him to the table and served Naruto some food. Naruto found that while it was not as good as ramen, it was still worth eating. So what are we going to do now, Kurenai-sensei? Hinata asked softly after the meal was finished. Kurenai's face took on a thoughtful look. I am not sure, Kurenai answered. All the genin just stared while Tazuna and his family listened intently. What do you mean? Sasuke queried. Well, I am not sure that Zabuza has been killed, Kurenai continued. The genin just stared. Tazuna and his family, however, were more shocked. Kurenai continued. He was killed by senbon, usually not a preferred way to kill someone. And also the way that he was dragged away from the scene. Usually they would just dispose of the body on the scene. And the fact that they would send just one hunter nin after Zabuza, one of the 7 swordsmen of the mist. Now I just got lucky because he underestimated me because he had not heard of me and he seemed to have a weakness to genjutsu, which is not surprising considering his speciality is silent killing in the mist. Kurenai answered. That seems a bit thin, Hinata objected. Kurenai just looked at her. Part of being a ninja is taking into account all possibilities, we must look beneath the beneath. Kurenai rebuked. Hinata just glared at Kurenai for speaking to her in that way. Kurenai ignored the look. Naruto just grinned. The young boy noticed the look. What are you grinning at? He demanded loudly. Tsunami whirled around. Inari, enough, she ordered. Inari just stuck out his bottom lip and pouted. Naruto, however, decided to answer the question posed to him. Because it's going to be fun fighting him again, Naruto answered. Inari just stared. Because it's fun, Inari shouted at him. He couldn't believe that someone would consider it fun to fight someone like Zabuza. He had heard about that man from his grandpa. Yeah, because it's fun, Naruto responded to Inari, not sure where it was going. How could you consider that fun? I mean, are you a freak or something, having fun fighting a person like that? Inari screamed at Naruto. Naruto just looked at him. How could it not be fun? Naruto responded. You think that it's fun to risk your life for other people, you idiot, Inari continued as if Naruto had never spoken. Naruto just rested his elbow on the table and put his chin in his hand. Sounds like you are afraid to me, Naruto said after a moment. Inari just stood there immediately. You're scared, that's all, Naruto continued. Shut up, Inari screamed in response before running out the room. They all looked at where Inari was and then at Naruto. They all knew that his words were true. I apologize for his behavior, Tsunami said after a moment before leaving the room after Inari. The Konoha ninja and Tazuna were quiet before Kurenai broke the silence. Well, I suggest that you all head to bed because tomorrow we will be training in preparation for Zabuza and his companion, Kurenai ordered, fully aware that this time the battle would not be so easy. All three nodded before going to their assigned rooms, with only Naruto bidding Tazuna good night. Early the next morning, all the Konoha ninja were standing in the middle of the forest waiting for Kurenai to show up. Where is she? Hinata wondered aloud as she sneaked yet another glance at Naruto. The boy was something of a mystery to her. She did not dislike him, yet she wasn't sure if she liked him or not. His cheerful actions on the one hand annoyed her, but when he had fought Zabuza and the demon brothers well, Hinata could not quite describe how she felt. Who can I ask about it, she wondered. Her thoughts were interrupted however by the arrival of Kurenai. Sorry I'm late, it's just that I had to go over some things with Tazuna this morning in regards to protection, Kurenai said when she arrived. The genin just nodded. Kurenai continued. Today we will be training your chakra control and stamina in preparation for the return of Zabuza and his partner, Kurenai continued. All three looked at her curiously but could see the advantages of stamina training. It was the chakra control that confused them. Since we can perform jutsus, doesn't that mean that our chakra control is sufficient? Sasuke asked. Kurenai shook her head. Your chakra control is not sufficient for higher level jutsus of repeated use of a jutsu. Tell me, Sasuke, just how tired are you after you use a fire jutsu? Do you think that you can immediately follow it up with another? Kurenai asked. Sasuke shook his head as the reality settled upon his mind. Kurenai nodded before continuing to the group. This will aid all three of you, Kurenai finished. They all nodded. Seeing that they were all now convinced, she withdrew 3 kunai and threw them into the ground in front of her students. Your task is to climb these trees using only your feet and chakra, she ordered. They just looked at her. Kurenai sighed and decided to do a demonstration. Watch carefully, she said after a moment and began to gather chakra into her feet, and walk up a nearby tree. Simple, no, she said when she reached the first branch. She looked at her students. Sasuke had an intrigued look on his face while Hinata looked bored, probably because she believed that since she was a Hyuga it would be simple and doing a Hyuga exercise would be much more beneficial to her than this. Kurenai wondered how long it would take for her to realize that it was a bit harder than it looked. Naruto however looked rather excited. Kurenai smiled at his reaction. He was so innocent. Later, Sasuke lay panting on the ground while Hinata sat cross-legged looking up at the canopy and Naruto sat down in a rare position of thought, staring unknowingly at a single spot. Out of the three, Hinata had managed to get the best results from the tree climbing, with Sasuke about 3 meters below him, and Naruto at about the same point. Hinata could now grasp the true essence of the training. Even though her chakra control was above her age, she could get no higher due to her lack of overall training. She was forced to concede that Kurenai's sensei had devised a good training exercise. She looked at the other two and noticed that they were nowhere near her level, and couldn't help but smirk. Naruto stopped looking at the ground and looked at the tree. He noticed once again that Hinata was higher than he and Sasuke. Naruto made a decision. He decided to ask Hinata to help. When Hinata had heard his request, she had considered his request for only a minute before giving him some tips. Sasuke, who watched this exchange, could only grin. He remembered how Hinata was at the academy. In the early days when it had become clear that due to her clan training she was at a higher level than most of the academy students. Many of the students from non-shinobi families had asked her for help and had received a vicious rebuttal from her. She had not changed her attitude much during her time at the academy, so for her to help Naruto so quickly was indeed surprising to Sasuke, who could only smirk. This would be fun to watch. Sasuke also reminded himself to ask Naruto to tell him what Hinata told him after they were finished. Several days later, Hinata looked on in amazement at how high Naruto and Sasuke were up the tree. After she had given them some advice, they had thrown themselves into their training ruthlessly. While she was confident that her chakra control was better, their stamina and chakra reserves were phenomenal. She watched as Naruto once ran nearly to the top of the highest tree in the forest, closely followed by Sasuke climbing up a tree of similar height. She caught herself looking at him and looked away. She needed to talk to someone about this, and soon. Hinata drew her thoughts away from that particular subject to the mission tomorrow. Starting tomorrow, they would all be guarding Tazuna at the bridge. Kurenai had told them that it would take about a week for Zabuza to recover from the induced death placed on him from the hunter Nin. Hinata smirked as she imagined their guarding mission. Hinata intended to have a far more active role in this one than the last battle. She would prove to everyone, including herself, that she was a worthy legacy of her mother. The next morning, Hinata, Sasuke and Kurenai stared out at the end of the bridge, waiting for Zabuza to arrive. Due to his injuries and the forced state of death, Kurenai had estimated that now would be the earliest that Zabuza would be able to attack. They waited nervously. Hinata stood next to Tazuna while Kurenai and Sasuke on opposite sides. All three of them felt the temperature drop. Sasuke was the first to notice that the mist was creeping in. "He's here," Sasuke yelled to the others. Tazuna, as per previous instructions, ran to the center of the bridge. Hinata stood directly in front of him, while Sasuke and Kurenai were several meters in front, about 2 meters apart. They could see two people's images appear out of the mist in front of them. "Guess I was right," Kurenai muttered to herself more than anyone. Sasuke just let out an "HN" in agreement. Zabuza and a hunter Nin appeared out of the mist. Zabuza seemed to look at all of them. "Why is the most interesting one not here?" Zabuza asked, but received no reply. Instead, Kurenai edged closer, hoping to be able to prevent Zabuza from entering the mist that he had created. Zabuza, however, noticed this and motioned the hunter ninja to intercept. Kurenai nodded at Sasuke, who in turn charged the hunter Nin. Senbon and Kunai clashed. They stood there in stalemate for a few seconds. "How fast are you?" the hunter Nin murmured to Sasuke before they both released their weapons to the right and spun. Weapons clashed again. "It appears that you have a rival for Speed Haku," Zabuza said after that exchange. Haku just nodded. "It appears that I will have to take this seriously," Haku murmured. Sasuke's eyes narrowed. "Just hold him off long enough, Sasuke," Kurenai thought hopefully. With Naruto. Naruto leapt across the forest, trying to remember the route that Kurenai had told him was the way to the mission's location. He stopped in a clearing and thought about it for a second. "Maybe I am lost," he wondered to himself, as he did not know where to go from here. Naruto looked around and noticed that one rock had sword marks all through it. "What's that?" he thought curiously as he ran over to the rock and inspected it. There were slash marks all over it. He then remembered what Kurenai had told him and the team about looking beneath the beneath. Naruto looked down and then noticed that there were some tracks leading from the stone to where he had come from. If they're some of the men that Gato hired, perhaps they know where to go, Naruto thought in conclusion and took off back to where he had just come from. Tazuna's house. "Let my mom go," Inari screamed. He was tied up to one of the railings on the staircase. Two Thuja of Gato were holding down Tsunami, their eyes going over every inch of her body. She tried to scream again, but the gag kept out all sound. "Well, shall we get started?" one asked the other as his hands reached for her shirt. Just then the door opened. "Excuse me, are you Gato's men?" asked a bright voice. They turned to see a blonde wrapped in chains and a huge grin. "What the hell is it to you?" one yelled back. The other noticed the headband. He quickly fastened her hands and stood up, drawing his sword. The other, noticing his partner, followed suit. Naruto, sensing their killing intent, did not even bother to reprod the question as he loosened his chains. The two thugs were torn to pieces in minutes. As the feral grin faded from his mind, he looked at Inari and Tsunami. Naruto decided to release them, as the old man had told him to help people when he could. He released Inari, who merely slumped to the ground in shock, while Tsunami clung to him and cried from the ordeal. After a couple of minutes he pulled her off. "I had to go, do you remember where Kurenai said I should go?" he continued. Tsunami looked up at him for a moment before going unsteadily to the table and getting a map. "You forgot this," she said, and Naruto looked at it for a moment and then grinned. Thank you, he grinned and was about to run out the door. How did you do that? Inari whispered at him, pointing to the remains. Naruto shrugged. I do what I want and make sure no one stops me, he said in a rare moment of seriousness. Inari looked at him. You mean do anything to achieve your dreams? Inari queried in shock. Naruto nodded and grinned before running out the door. Inari walked over to his mother and they curled up in a corner, contemplating the events of that morning. Naruto sped through the forest, knowing where he had to go. Naruto leapt through the trees, his thoughts drifting back to the conversation he had with Inari. He was aware once again that he had no dreams or ambitions. The old man had told him dreams, but Naruto had no dreams. Somehow he knew that they were important. He had seen how angry Inari had been, and when he had realized that it was because his dreams were being prevented. Somehow he knew that he needed one. Naruto could feel his heart grow heavy and knew that he did not have his customary smile or even a grin. What am I feeling? Naruto thought to himself. He shook his head as he spied a tower over the canopy. Gatu's place, he thought to himself. He continued to run at the tower and thought back to what Kurenai had ordered him to do. The day before. Naruto, I know that this is cruel, but I need you to go to where Gatu lives, Kurenai had told him sadly. Naruto did not understand why Kurenai was so sad. Why? He asked her. Kurenai nodded absently and continued. I want you to go there and eliminate Gatu while Sasuke, Hinata and I distract Zabuza and his companion on the bridge, before bringing back proof, she finished. Naruto nodded. He had never killed someone that was not trying to kill him, so he was a bit excited as to how it would feel. Outside of Gatu's tower, Naruto once again had that feeling of apprehension at the thought of killing Gatu. He approached the tower slowly, remembering the things that Iruka and the old man had taught him. He stopped at the edge of the woods. Naruto noticed that there were very few people in the compound. There were only 2 guards at either side of the gate and no one in the yard. The guards at the gate also appeared very tired. Naruto decided that he should ask one of the guards. He remembered the 2 back at the house and thought that he should use a bit of force. He drew one kunai from his holster on his leg and threw it towards the one on the left of the gate. It lodged itself into the guard's throat and the other drew his sword when he saw his partner fall. Naruto ran forward and loosened his chains. Naruto was not used to using his chains completely on their own and gripped the right chain and smashed it into the thug's sword. The sword was knocked to the side and Naruto spun. He roundhouse kicked the thug in the side of the face. The thug flew to the side and he slammed both his chains into the thug's torso. A cry could be heard throughout the yard. Naruto sat on top of the thug. Do you know where Gatu is? He asked the thug, who just stared blankly back at him. At the bridge, Tazuna had fled as per Kurenai's orders when they had engaged the 2 ninja. He had gotten on a boat that had been moored under the bridge and sailed away as soon as he could. Kurenai was struggling against Zabuza. She could not use her genjutsu as she could not see or sense Zabuza due to the Kirigakure jutsu. The only reason that she could still fight was because of the footsteps that Zabuza made when he approached and her advanced hearing. She had several shallow wounds on her lower arms. Think Kurenai, think. How are you going to get yourself out of this, she thought to herself. As she thought about how to get out of it, she also thought about how Naruto was going. Where is he? She thought to herself. She could not help but worry about him. She had felt guilty about getting him to assassinate Gatu, but he was the only one that could do it. Hinata and Sasuke, no matter how troubled, were not equipped to deal with it. Suddenly a nameless scream filled the air. That sounded like Hinata, she thought worriedly. Hinata fell to one knee, her teeth gritted in pain. Her Byakugan was active, but she did not have the necessary reaction time needed to dodge the needles. It had appeared at start of the battle that they would have the advantage when Sasuke had bested the Hunter Nin at the initial battle of speed. However, when the Nin had activated his bloodline, they had been at his mercy. Shit, Sasuke muttered next to her. They both were at a loss as to how to defeat the Hunter Nin. I just can't see him, Sasuke growled to himself. Hinata, Byakugan still active, was trying to think. Then an idea hit her. She turned to Sasuke, the faster of the 2. Think you can catch him? She asked. Sasuke looked up and nodded. I have near 360 vision. I guess that you have noticed that to move between mirrors he must jump from one mirror to the other. Well, I will defend from the needles and tell you where to attack, and you charge. Hinata told him. Sasuke was loath to rely on someone else, but he saw her point and knew that this was the only way that they could win. He nodded and went back to back with Hinata. Haku watched the two as they settled into ready positions. He knew that she would have to get serious if she hoped to win. Haku looked over at Zabuza briefly. The things I do for you, Haku thought silently as he readied some more senbon. He had an idea about what they were going to do. Hinata watched the mirrors, looking for the real one. She noticed a flicker and raised her kunai. She knocked the senbon to the side and pointed without moving her head. He charged at the mirror Hinata was pointing at and rushed at it. Since he could not see Haku, he tried to tackle the frail ninja, but found that she misjudged badly and crashed into the ground. Hinata saw what had happened and sighed. She knew that he needed better eyes to get the strategy to work. Sasuke slammed his fist to the ground. If only he was stronger, if only he had the Sharingan. He rushed back to Hinata. She did not say a word. She did not need to. He knew how hopeless he was. However, they had to try again. They had no other way to win. Kurenai rolled to the left and rose, kunai ready. She knew that she had to clear the mist away, but she also knew that her skills were not sufficient at the moment to clear the mist, so her only option was to get out of the mist. But Zabuza would not follow her and she needed to finish him quickly or her students would be hurt. But Zabuza would not follow her out of the mist. Kurenai ground her teeth in frustration. She now knew what the other Junin instructors meant when they said that having a team was the true teat of teamwork. She truly was fighting of someone else. Kurenai could only hope that Naruto came back fast. Sasuke gritted his teeth. A single thought ran through his head. He was nearly there. He could nearly see the hunter. Just a little more. He looked over and saw that Hinata was panting. He knew that it was the strain of keeping her Byakugan active for so long. He knew that he had not much time left. Haku looked at the two genin in his ice prison and decided to end it. It pained Haku to do this, but he knew it could not last forever. Haku only hoped that Zabuza would care about what he had done. Haku looked at the girl in the center of the circle and decided to target her first. Zabuza decided to try a different tact instead of just directly attacking. You know, your students are probably dead by now, Zabuza's voice floated through the mist. Kurenai just stayed remarkably still, trying to trace the source of the voice. Zabuza continued, my partner is a highly skilled shinobi, and yours are just genin. Since Haku has used his bloodline they have no hope, Zabuza said once again. Kurenai smirked. I will have to disagree with you. Those two in there are two of the best, they will not lose, she replied. Zabuza just grunted. He had nothing to say to that. Kurenai however let a small smirk touch her mouth, before running directly at him. Zabuza heard the footsteps and acted out of instinct. He swung horizontally. Kurenai ducked and slammed her body into his. She knew that it was a stupid move but she had no choice. She needed to catch him out now. Megan. Jubaku Satsu, she murmured as she stared up at him. Zabuza cursed as he attempted to punch her in the face. His fist ran through air as he felt his limbs tighten. He cursed as he remembered the jutsu. Kurenai loomed in for the kill. Several minutes earlier, Hinata fell, her scream echoing. Sasuke stared, and then whirled his eyes up to Haku. Haku decided to finish the battle. He readied his senbon, and threw. Sasuke saw them. He finally saw them. He deflected them and threw several shuriken at the hunter nin. To say that Haku was surprised was an understatement. He blocked two with a senbon but a third landed in his shoulder. Haku winced as it hit. The pain dulling his concentration slightly, he crashed into the ice mirror instead of going into it. Sasuke rushed forward preparing to throw the kunai. Haku ripped out the shuriken and threw it at him. He deflected it but the distraction was enough for Haku to retreat back into the mirrors. Sasuke cursed. It ends, Haku said hauntingly. Sasuke snorted in amusement. He could see him now. His confidence however faded when he saw what happened next. One Haku after the other appeared in the mirrors. Sasuke stared and cursed. He started spinning. Haku wasted no time and unleashed a rain of senbon. Sasuke jumped to the side but was too slow. His lower body became a pincushion. His yell echoed throughout the bridge. Haku prepared for the final blow. Kurenai heard the yell and cursed. Zabuza heard it as well and grinned. Kurenai cursed and drove the kunai down into his neck, before rushing off through the mist to help her students. Just as Haku was about to strike, several chains smashed into the mirrors. Haku turned and stared. All he saw was a blonde with chains coming out of his body. So he arrives, Haku thought. Naruto rushed into the center of the mirrors. Sasuke, seeing Naruto, just stared. He stopped next to Sasuke and looked down. Gone was the smile or even the demonic grin, and in its place was a serious expression bordering on anger. Sasuke had never seen that kind of expression on Naruto before. He turned to Hinata, who lay there motionless. Two feelings welled up in Naruto. What is this feeling? When my heart beats so quickly yet it feels so heavy, he asked. Sasuke looked at him. That is anger and sadness, the emotions of the Avenger, he replied. Naruto looked at him and then at Hinata. He felt his blood rush and he clenched his fist. Sasuke noticed this and absently wondered why Haku had not attacked yet. Kurenai rushed through the mist to the mirrors. She was shocked at what she saw. Inside she saw Naruto standing and Sasuke kneeling. She then found Hinata lying there motionless. Kurenai rushed once again into the fray, but a huge gush of chakra stopped her. She then saw Naruto, red chakra beginning to form around his body, and was reminded of what the Hokage had told her of a suspicion he had. I believe that it is a combination of the corrupt seal and a defense mechanism that keeps his emotions locked up. This was probably brought upon from the years of near isolation that brought this upon him. Sarutobi had told her weeks beforehand when they had discussed his emotions. The words that followed were resounding her head now. Just hope that his emotions do not burst through. If I am right and they are connected with the seals, then a shock could disrupt the seals that are already corrupt. Sarutobi finished, his voice steady but tired. Kurenai dragged her thoughts back from the past to the present. When she looked closely she noticed that his hands were shaking and he was looking at both Sasuke and Hinata. Is this the shock of seeing Hinata and Sasuke like this? Kurenai murmured in shock, her mind refusing to believe. The red chakra growing stronger and stronger. Kurenai felt like vomiting when she sensed it. It was repulsive. The seal was collapsing. She now knew that Naruto's mental state was deteriorating with the flood of the emotions. The Hokage had been right. Sasuke looked at Naruto in apprehension. He did not know what was happening, but he had never been this scared. Not even that night of the massacre. It was just the sheer repulsiveness of the chakra. He shivered as Naruto roared in pain. Naruto felt his gut wrench. His normally comfortable chains were now unbearable. He felt them begin to burn and he could hear a distant laughter. Almost by instinct he reached down to the chains. The pain was nearly beyond his tolerance, it felt like a furnace in his stomach. He reached down to the chains in his stomach. Haku watched in repulsion and morbid fascination. This boy seemed more demon than human now. That roar of pain made him shiver. Haku looked out into the mist briefly and saw that Kurenai was standing just outside the mirrors. He looked behind her and saw the mist still there. What's going on? What happened to Master Zabuza? He thought in a panic. He however was forced out of his musings when he felt a sudden surge of power. He looked back into the ice prison and was greeted with a very unexpected and slightly disgusting sight. The burning had become unbearable. Naruto knew that he had to get rid of it somehow. So he drove his hands into his own stomach, next to the chains, and yanked out the base of the chains. A sharp pain ripped through him, followed by a feeling of power. It seemed that his world became focused. His vision became sharp and he could feel his adrenaline surge through his body. He looked down at his shaking hands and saw that he was holding two small metal kunai attached to his chains. The holes in his gut were also beginning to heal. Then the pain returned, in far greater intensity. However, this time it was his whole body. He fell to his hands and knees and roared once again. Sasuke looked at Naruto and shivered once again. Sasuke had no idea what was happening. He looked back at Hinata and saw a faint stirring. She's alive, he muttered. He guessed that the second wave of Naruto's roar would have shaken her out of her reverie. How could someone with such precise aim have missed like that? He muttered in shock, unsure of what to think, his thoughts a mess. A flash caught the cornet of his eye and he turned around and saw Haku's follow through. Haku had decided that enough was enough. As much as he was curious as to what would happen, he could only procrastinate so long. Naruto falling to his knees was the signal for Haku to finish it. He threw a senbon at Naruto's right eye, intending to finish it quickly. The results surprised him to say the least. Naruto was no longer in control. He was like a third person in his own body. He saw the Senbon, he saw himself slap it away, and he saw himself launch one of his chains, now with the kunai on the end, at the mirror. The chain, beginning to become red-tinged, smashed through the mirror. Naruto watched on as his body began a lethal dance. The chains just went on and on. Sasuke lay flat on the ground, watching in wonder at the chain prison around him. Naruto chased after Haku, chains acting on their own. Naruto threw a punch that Haku easily avoided. Haku, however, could not follow up due to the chain's constant pursuit. Kurenai watched in morbid fascination as the mirrors were slowly destroyed. It was obvious to anyone that Haku had not the time to replenish the mirrors. There were by now only a few left and the fight was beginning to escape the confines of the mirrors, even though the hunter Nin tried to keep it in with the hope that he could gain enough time to replenish them. What worried Kurenai, however, was the fact that the chains were steadily turning red and that his stomach wounds were glowing with red chakra as well. She could feel the chakra ride against her and it sickened her. Kurenai knew that she had to restore the seal somehow, but she was unsure how to do that. Unexperienced with seals, she was unsure as to how this could be done. She only knew that a seal should be restored, however the thought horrified her. How could she plunge those kunai into his stomach? The thought repulsed her. She knew, however, that it must be done. Kurenai formed several seals and rushed in. Her first target was Haku. Haku, tired from maintaining his bloodline as well as the constant pursuit from Naruto, was unprepared for the genjutsu onslaught. Haku rolled out of the way of a chain and threw a senbon at Kurenai, whom the kunai just passed through. Haku cursed when he realized he was caught in a genjutsu. He noticed more and more, but could not react as while his attention was on Kurenai, the two kunai attached to the chain stabbed into his lower back. Haku, paralyzed by the pain, could not react as he felt a kunai stab his chest. His head dropped and saw a Kurenai come into view. The quiet determination in her eyes was the last thing that he saw. "Master Zabuza, I have failed," were his last thoughts. Kurenai threw the body to the side. She saw the kunai being withdrawn and formed some more seals. Naruto watched as he aimed his chains at Kurenai. He watched as they flew at him. He watched as they impaled her. He watched as that Kurenai disappeared in a puff of smoke. He watched as another Kurenai that was behind the first grabbed both chains and run towards him. He watched as she stabbed them into his gut. And then there was pain. Kurenai panted from exhaustion as she let her hands slip from the chains. Naruto's cry began straight after she had inserted the kunai. He fell into her arms and she dropped to her knees cradling him. His cries soon subsided and he began to calm down. She looked behind and saw both Sasuke and Hinata rise. Kurenai sighed in relief. However, a strange sound broke her out of her reverie. A hollow clap echoed through the air. She turned and saw 2 score of mercenaries step out of the mist. Kurenai's thoughts were in a jumble. She looked at Naruto and back to Gato. Well, it looks like today's been a great day for me. I don't have to pay 2 missing nin and I get to destroy this annoying bridge project, Gato said cheerfully. Kurenai just stared, unable to speak. Gato noticed Haku's body. "Oh, why did you have to make it so clean?" he whined. Kurenai began to glare. Gato, seeing the glare, began to chuckle. A cry sounded behind him. He turned and saw several of his mercenaries dead, and a nearly dead Zabuza standing with a kunai, sword at his feet. "You dare disrespect him like that?" Zabuza snarled. Gato just took a step back while some mercenaries moved in front of him. Kurenai started to rise. Zabuza looked over at her and grinned. "You're not the only one who can cast genjutsu," he said to her. Kurenai just stared, surprised that her concentration was that bad. Zabuza turned back to Gato. No words were needed. H rushed forward, kunai in each hand. What followed was a bloody massacre. Zabuza charged, with no regard for his life, into the mass. It was sheer determination and rage that caused Zabuza to stand up to the pain. He plowed through them, kunais slashing through Gato's guards. They circled and slashed his unguarded back. This was futile as he continued to charge. Blood flowed freely fro his back as he raised his kunai. Gato stood transfixed, too scared to move. His guards could do little as he plunged the kunai into Gato's throat before stumbling to the ground. The mercenaries looked on in shock as Zabuza just kneeled there, hand clutching his shoulder. You bastard," one of the mercenaries yelled. This was quickly agreed upon by the mercenaries. Zabuza however ignored them while looking over at the corpse of Haku, before falling forward, blood flowing from a wound in his shoulder. Kurenai looked at the two and nodded in understanding. The mercenaries were getting restless. Kurenai knew where this was going and did not enjoy the prospect of facing this many enemies, no matter how weak. She got to her feet and saw that Naruto tries to follow, despite his wounds. The look in his eyes was something that she was not expecting. It was sadness and fear. The general consensus from the mercenaries was that they should try to recover their loss of income from the village, and were about to loot the shops and houses near He Bridge. They turned with vicious grins and looked at the exhausted ninjas and expected an easy victory. What they hadn't expected was courage, not from the ninja but from the villages. Marching from the end of the bridge, armed with plows, spears and the occasional crossbow. At the head of the mob was Inari, wearing an iron helmet that did not fit, and wielding a small crossbow, and Tazuna, clad in his usual dress. He aimed and sent a bolt flying through the air. It landed at the lead mercenary's feet. They all stopped, looking cautiously at the mob. They stood behind the ninjas, all looking determined. "Leave now," Inari yelled at the mercenaries, who despite the large mob, were still intent on the mob. Kurenai however smirked. This should work, she thought. Performing some seals she cast yet another genjutsu. The mercenaries stopped. The mob stepped forward. The mercenaries stepped back. The mob stepped forward once again. The mercenaries stepped back even more. The mob stepped forward even more. The mercenaries turned and fled. 2 hours later at Tazuna's house. The Konoha ninja sat at the table, staring into nothing. The battle on the bridge had shocked them all. For Hinata and Sasuke it had forced to abandon their childhood. For Kurenai it had given her a chance to face the true difficulties of teaching a genin team. And for Naruto it had shown him a side of human nature he had never experienced. A darker side he had previously walked through unknowingly. He had discovered not only how much death was a tragedy, but also something more fearful. Hinata and Sasuke said their good nights while Naruto and Kurenai stayed at the table. Naruto turned to Kurenai. "I was so scared," he whispered. Kurenai looked at him in shock. "Of what?" she asked. "Of losing control," he replied softly. Kurenai understood. She would have to report this to the Hokage, but for now. She put an arm around his shoulder and drew him in close. They stayed in that position for some time. Hinata lay in her futon thinking of what happened. As she had watched him that day she had been exhilarated even though she had been injured. More exhilarated than she had been in a long time. Why does he excite me like that, she thought. A week later, the Konoha ninja waved at Inari and his family as they were leaving. As they turned, Tsunami came rushing forward and embraced Naruto. "Thank you," she whispered in his ear before giving him a peck on the lips. All three Konoha ninja had shocked expressions on their faces as they watched the brief exchange. Just as quickly Tsunami turned him around and pushed him away from her in a friendly manner. Naruto grinned back at her and waved before walking back towards Konoha, with the rest of the Konoha ninja following after a pause. Tsunami looked at her father and asked him what he was going to name the bridge now it was completed. It was Inari who answered. "After the person who gave me strength. It shall be called the Great Naruto Bridge," Inari replied. Tsunami smiled and ruffled his hair. "A great name it is," she replied as she looked back to where the Konoha ninja had been. In Konoha, 1 week later, Kurenai watched as her 3 students trained. The mission to wave had opened her eyes to her students' deficiencies and also their need to become adults. Before the mission she had thought to give them childhoods. To allow them to keep their innocence for a little longer. Wave, Gatu, and especially Zabuza, had taught her to teach them, and teach them quickly. They would not survive in the shinobi world without these skills. She especially felt for Naruto. That boy above all else deserved a childhood. His reaction to Sasuke and Hinata's condition had told them exactly what was happening with his emotions. They were not missing, or lacking. The corrupt seal's effect on his mental state had blocked his emotions, and his recent weeks before the mission had left him with new emotions boiling just under the seal, and the shock had nearly broken the seal. He had ripped one of the corrupt seals out to prevent destroying both. Kurenai assumed that it was an unconscious reaction to protect himself. The Hokage had agreed with her hypothesis, and had smiled when she had finished. There was no need for him to learn new emotions. He already had them. Kurenai shifted her thoughts back to her team. The team itself had certainly changed. Sasuke was now far more humble than before. He was still arrogant, but he now treated his team with a little more respect. Even Naruto, whom he had a casual friendship, he now slightly respected. Kurenai saw this as a definite improvement and now had him training in strength and speed. Sasuke, while technically gifted, lacked the speed and strength to perform higher-level jutsu and keep up physically with stronger ninja. Hinata and Naruto were doing the same training. Both had relied on the one skill throughout their missions. That reliance, however, would get them both killed eventually. Kurenai now taught them basic jutsu and their uses. When to use Kawarimi no Jutsu, when to use a Bushin, etc. She also trained all three in basic tactics. They would need all of them to survive. She looked upon Naruto and smiled. He no longer had the permanent smile, but that however gave his smile more warmth, more truth. He had discovered something to fear. That had darkened his spirit, if only slightly. Kurenai reflected on their relationship since Wave. Ever since that time at the table they had seemed closer. His chains no longer wrapped around him when he slept in his bed. They also seemed to talk more. She flushed as she remembered how he bragged about his missions. Kurenai stopped thinking about Naruto and focused on her team's training. She needed to train them hard if they were even had a hope of being competitive in the exam. They were above first-year Genin, but she knew that they were a long way of Chunin. 2 hours later, Kurenai watched her three students walk down the street towards the ramen stand. Standing in the middle was Naruto with Sasuke and Hinata on either side. Kurenai noticed how Hinata glanced at Naruto whenever she knew that he was not looking. Kurenai knew the signs of a crush and was glad. It seemed that Hinata was losing her coldness towards others. As they sat down for ramen, Kurenai thought about the exams. They had been announced just after they had returned from Wave, and Kurenai had constantly thought about whether or not her students should be entered. Tomorrow was the day when the teams would be registered for the exams. She looked at the three and decided to sleep on it. Hinata could not help herself. She knew that she had never acted like this before, but she could not help herself. She was confused. Hinata glanced at Naruto before turning her head back to her ramen. "I done it again," she thought angrily to herself. Hinata had seen the other girls in her academy act like this towards Sasuke, and she did not like the thought that she was doing the same thing. She decided that she would ask Kurenai when they were alone, as the boys would have to leave eventually. Kurenai was the only woman that Hinata knew well enough to ask about these things. Eventually Sasuke left, but Naruto seemed to just hang around. Hinata wondered when would leave, but Hinata knew that she had to wait for Naruto to leave. Kurenai decided to send Naruto home early as it was clear that Hinata wanted to talk. Kurenai could also guess what it was about as Hinata kept glancing at not only Naruto but also her since she had finished her ramen. "Naruto, why don't you go home and wait for me?" Kurenai told Naruto. Naruto nodded, said his goodbyes before leaving. Hinata watched him go with a confused look. Kurenai decided to break the silence. "So what did you want to talk about?" she asked Hinata, even though she had a fair idea about what was going on. Hinata fidgeted for a moment while Kurenai waited. "It's about Naruto," Kurenai stated after a moment. Hinata just nodded. Kurenai just smiled slightly. Kurenai shifted position to face Hinata, glad at the fact that she was beginning to show regular emotions, and also not believe that everyone was beneath her. They began to talk about Naruto. Sometime later, Hinata waved to Kurenai and left. She now knew what was happening between her and Naruto. She had a crush. When Hinata had first heard it, she had denied it strongly, but Kurenai had convinced her. Kurenai had told her that for a young ninja to have a crush on the first person to save their life. Kurenai had told her about the time she had a crush on the Yondaime, not sure about spelling, after he had saved her life on a mission. Hinata walked home with a great weight off her shoulders. There was, however, another issue of her not knowing what to do with Naruto. She decided to talk to her father's second wife Nariko about it. She was of course the perfect female Hyuga, and the woman whom Hinata modeled herself off. Nariko listened patiently to Hinata as she told her about her crush. Nariko showed no emotion as Hinata and spoke and quietly considered what to do after she had finished. "I will think on this tonight," she said finally. Hinata nodded and got up to leave. Nariko sat silently in the room after she left. She knew that Hiyashi had considered Hinata having a husband not of the clan so that they could be considered more in touch with the rest of Konoha instead of being considered isolated. And from what she had heard about this Naruto Uzumaki, he seemed to be strong. She decided to talk to Hiyashi about his Uzumaki. Hiyashi listened to Noriko talk about Hinata and Naruto and remembered about what had happened over the years. It was true that he was the container, however not many knew of it, and he knew that Hinata needed a strong consort if she was going to hold the Hyuga clan together. He also knew that the strength of the container would be extremely useful to Hinata. I know of this boy and he is indeed strong and would be useful to Hinata with ruling the clan. I will let Hinata decide about what to do. She has matured enough over the last 3 years that she can make the decision herself, as she is well aware of her position, Hiyashi said after Noriko had told him of Hinata. Noriko nodded and left the room. Even after 3 years of marriage he still treated her formally, no matter how well she and Hinata got along. Kurenai walked into her apartment and saw Naruto lying on the couch fast asleep, chains loosely draped over his body, lightly snoring. Kurenai smiled and reached down and shook him awake. He slowly opened his eyes and yawned. The first time she had done this his chains had reacted and tried to grab her. Now she could approach without fear of the chains. Naruto sat up groggily and Kurenai guided him towards the bathroom. He nodded vaguely her and made his way towards the bathroom, Kurenai following him. She fetched his towel from his room while he undressed in the bathroom and tossed it to him, eyes closed. Even though she had seen him naked, she was still a little embarrassed. 2 hours later, Kurenai lay in bed, staring up at the ceiling. She knew that her team were capable of competing in the exam in terms of skill. It was their teamwork that she was worried about. Hinata's actions in training and especially that day had given her something to think about. Hinata now regarded Naruto as an equal and she seemed to respect Sasuke, while the two boys worked well together. Kurenai closed her eyes with a smirk. She would take a risk with the three. The next morning, Kurenai sat in the group of Junin and waited while the Hokage addressed them. She had come to the decision the previous night that she would enter her team into the exam based on the improvement that they shown. She glanced over at the other Junin and noticed that Kakeshi was on time. Just then the Hokage asked them to nominate their teams. Kurenai stepped forward. "I, Kurenai Yui, nominate my team to participate in the exams," she said calmly. She stepped back and noticed that both Asuma and Kakeshi had stepped forward. This must be a highly trained group, she thought. She was shaken out of her reverie by Iruka to rush towards the Hokage to voice his objection. Kurenai could not hear the exact details as she had turned around and left the room to collect the forms from the register. The Hokage sat back in his seat and puffed his pipe. He knew that the council would have to monitor Team 7 closely to assess Sasuke's mental state. If it was judged that he was stable, he would be given to Kakeshi for training in his Sharingan. As much as Sarutobi hated breaking up the teams, he knew that Kakeshi was best suited for him after he had become more stable. He also knew that they would also be monitoring Naruto for similar yet darker reasons. Naruto sat back against the tree in the training ground with his team waiting for their sensei. She had left earlier that morning for the Hokage's tower, but he knew that she was never usually that late. He also noticed that Hinata was sitting much closer than usual and she seemed to be looking at the ground a lot. Sasuke had also noticed this but was very much aware as to why. The only thing he was confused about was what had brought about the sudden change. Should be amusing, he thought as a light smirk adorned his features. Hinata shuffled her feet slightly and glanced at Naruto. She knew that she should initiate conversation, but for some reason could not work up the courage. She remembered to that morning when Noriko had told her that she should pursue Naruto. When Hinata had asked about her father, Noriko had told her that her father would approve. She had not questioned further. Hinata had assumed that Noriko would go to her father. Hinata had actually hoped that it would happen. Her father was more likely to accept the argument from Noriko than her. She raised her head in another attempt to initiate conversation, but this time however was interrupted by Kurenai, who had just arrived. Kurenai told them about the exam and noted the pleased expressions on both Sasuke and Hinata's faces. Naruto's expression was however more guarded. Since Wave he had been extremely cautious about new things and she could not seem to help him through it, something that annoyed her more than it should. She was more annoyed at herself than Naruto however. Kurenai handed out the forms and told them to go and think about it. Sasuke walked towards the market after a short wave to the others while Naruto walked towards the gates with Hinata following. Kurenai watched this behavior with a neutral expression. Naruto and Hinata walked down some streets, each silent. Hinata knew that she would enter the exams and her thoughts rested solely on the blonde next to her. Naruto's thoughts were a mix of emotions. He was still unused to fear and when it gripped him he could barely shake it off. His fear was however only contained to one area, and that was new things. The more unfamiliar, the more fearful he became. He too suddenly heard a scream from several streets over and immediately rushed over. What they found was two unknown ninja assaulting a small boy. Neither Hinata or Naruto were inclined to save him, but Hinata had immediately recognized the headbands as coming from sand and rushed to defend him out of village pride. The two unknown ninja noticed Hinata rushing forward and jumped back, falling into a ready stance, waiting for Hinata to charge. Naruto remembered what Kurenai had told him about teamwork and had rushed towards them. He suddenly felt a large amount of killer intent and stopped in his tracks. He looked up and noticed a third red-haired ninja standing silently in a tree. The intent was passive and not directed at him, but it was there. Naruto now had more control over his reactions to killing intent, but not enough that when it was directed at him he could remain calm. It was all he could not to try and slaughter the ninja then and there. The two ninja on the ground also noticed Gaara and had stopped. Hinata had also stopped in expectation. Enough, the redhead spoke calmly, his voice promising violence. The two relaxed their stances, shivering slightly. The redhead looked at Naruto and jumped down from the tree. I am Gaara, and those two are Temari and Kankuro. You are? Gaara asked. Naruto and Hinata. Naruto answered. Gaara nodded. I look forward to the exam, he said softly and turned and walked away. Temari and Kankuro watched in shock. The chained blonde had stood up to Gaara and not been afraid. Hell of a man there, Temari thought as she admired him openly. Hinata caught this look and all nervousness vanished. Eyes of him whore, she hissed at Temari. Temari nearly flinched at the venom in Hinata's voice. She grabbed Kankuro's sleeve and dragged him down the street. They did not need another fight. Naruto and Hinata turned around and looked at the small boy behind them. He was several years younger than them and had seemed to regain his composure. Thanks for the assist, he said with a bright smile. Hinata just nodded, Hyuga mask firmly in place, while Naruto remained neutral. He was still calming down after the meeting with Gaara. The boy was not finished however as he continued to thank as well as compliment his rescuers. Hinata was considering just walking off when the boy told Naruto that he was lucky to have such a pretty and powerful girlfriend. Naruto had also calmed down enough to answer. She is a very pretty girlfriend, Naruto answered, remembering how to be polite. Hinata could feel the blush creep up her cheeks and refused to shame herself in front of both Naruto and the young boy. She quickly made her goodbyes and rushed towards her clan estate. She did not know that Naruto had never heard the term before and had taken it quite literally as a girl who was a friend. The young boy had introduced himself as Konohamaru and since then had attached himself to Naruto. Naruto did not mind the attention and talked freely with the boy. They both agreed that ramen was the food of the gods and that the Hokage was the greatest ninja in the village. Just then Konohamaru rushed forward and yelled for Naruto to follow. Naruto just grinned and began to jog after him. Suddenly for the second time that day he heard a scream. He ran forward and noticed that once again Konohamaru was in trouble, however this time he was tied to a tree. This time it was a masked chubby man. The man said nothing and just waited. Naruto loosened his chains however kept his hands free. He tried to remember what Kurenai had told him about strategy. Distraction, he thought and ran to the left. Naruto had limited control over his chains without his hands but enough to use them defensively. He threw several shuriken at the chubby ninja who rolled to avoid, away from the tree. He then charged forward, hands in a cross seal. The chubby ninja eyes widened as he saw a second chainless Naruto rush towards Konohamaru. The chubby ninja threw a kunai at the clone. The kunai however was blocked by a chain. The fat ninja eyes widened as the chain loop came between him and the captive, while the real Naruto, kunai in hand, launched himself at the ninja. The fat ninja, realizing that he had no hope of keeping Konohamaru captive, jumped back and threw several smoke bombs to the ground and escaped. Naruto stopped and looked back at Konohamaru. The boy was free and running towards him. His thoughts were however that of confusing. He told Konohamaru to go tell the Anbu what had happened and sat on the ground. With that exchange he was no longer afraid of discovery. He had never used strategy in combat before, but it was fun. He was also unsure why he had saved Konohamaru. He thought that it might be kindness, but he went to ask Kurenai just to make sure. Konohamaru told the Anbu all that had happened, to which they had responded that they would investigate. They of course knew that Iruka had tested the genin on the orders of the Hokage. Kurenai had been ecstatic. In the course of one afternoon Naruto had gotten over his fear of discovery and also shown kindness towards another, who was virtually a stranger. She knew what had happened when Naruto had told her of his actions due to the bird that the Hokage had sent them. She had kept that to herself and instead sat down next to him at the table and helped him fill in the form. They then walked to the training grounds together to meet with the rest of the team. Hinata was waiting in the training grounds with Sasuke for the Kurenai and Naruto. When Hinata had gotten home she had realized that Naruto probably did not know the term meant, as he was innocent in some areas. This did not stop her blushing when she thought about what he said. She saw that Naruto and Kurenai were approaching. They are standing rather closely, she thought with slight venom. She did not however think any more of it, as it was Kurenai who had encouraged her. Well, since it is clear that you are all prepared, I will submit these forms and you are to report to room 301 of the academy for the exams, Kurenai told her team. They all nodded, and Naruto, his curiosity restores, ran up towards the academy, while the others followed at a slower pace, accustomed to his outbursts. Good luck, Kurenai thought. Naruto looked at the door. There were 2 men guarding it who were refusing to let people enter. There is something funny about that door, Naruto announced to all assembled. Most just stared at him in bewilderment, however Sasuke and Hinata just sighed, used to his eccentrics. The 2 guards' eyes twitched, but other than that gave no indication of having heard what he said. Hinata however took what he said seriously and activated her Byakugan. Genjutsu, she muttered. Both Sasuke and Naruto heard what she had said. Hinata motioned them to follow her as she had seen the room's real number as 201. All 3 turned to leave with the crowd just looking at them, wondering if they had decided to give up. How did you know? Sasuke asked, intently curious about his skills. Naruto just shrugged. He couldn't explain it, but he always got goosebumps when Genjutsu was being used, although it had only started when he had stated living with Kurenai. The guards however just smirked slightly as they watched the trio walk towards another set of stairs leading up to the next floor. As they were about to reach the staircase they heard a voice shout at them from behind. Hold it right there, someone shouted from behind. They all turned and Naruto was confronted once again with something new but incredibly frightening. What the hell is that? He whispered to Hinata, who was standing next to him, wearing a similar expression. I have no idea, she whispered back, staring at what could be described as a boy dressed in green. I challenge you to a match, Sasuke Uchiha. The boy yelled and Naruto yelped in fear, running behind Hinata. Hinata blushed when she felt him lean against her back, breath hot on her neck. Sasuke looked at Naruto cowering in fear and Hinata's blush and smirked before turning to the green-clad boy. And you are? He asked calmly. I am Rock Lee, the green beast of Konoha, he announced once again. Sasuke had noticed his teammates shaking their heads in defeat. Naruto came out from behind Hinata when he heard him introduce himself, deciding that he was just a strange ninja. Kurenai had told him that there were some strange ninja in the village. He walked up to the boy and stared at his face. Are they alive? Naruto asked, looking up at his face. Lee just stared, not knowing how to reply to such innocent curiosity. That is a very unyouthful thing to say, Lee finally managed after a short pause. A sharp contrast to the loud challenges he had made earlier, before turning his attention back to Sasuke. Well, do you accept this challenge? He demanded, his exuberance once again restored. Sasuke just looked at him for a moment before shrugging. A good test for my Sharingan before the exam, he thought to himself as he walked with the others towards the dojo for the match. Several minutes later, Naruto watched in interest as Sasuke could narrowly keep up with Lee, even with his Sharingan active. Naruto had learned the name in one of their group training sessions and thought that the Sharingan made things boring. Where was the fun of fighting if you knew what a person was going to do? Naruto watched, his interest growing as he watched the scary green genin kick Sasuke high into the air and begin to wrap bandages around his body. Naruto had never seen a technique like this before. The bandage wrapping was stopped however by a sudden voice. Naruto looked to see a huge talking turtle begin to berate Lee. Naruto stared in fascination. He had never seen a turtle before. He briefly wondered and they could all talk. Naruto's thoughts were once again interrupted by a new yet disturbing presence. Suddenly standing on top of the turtle was another green-clad man. Although this time the man was bigger and had a jacket on, he still had the same look and the same eyebrows. Naruto once again hid behind Hinata. Hinata once again felt Naruto's breath against the back of her neck and blushed again. This time she was not as shocked, but she still felt the blood rush to her cheeks. She mentally berated herself for reacting on such a way, even if Naruto did not notice. Naruto for his part remained still as he studied the pair as they interacted. His morbid fascination turned to absolute fear as he witnessed a sunset begin to form. Naruto could only come to one conclusion as he watched them. He heard about this from Kurenai when she was teaching him tolerance. "Hinata, who do you think is the uke?" he whispered to said girl. Hinata paled at the mental image but could not deny the possibly, especially after what she had seen. Sasuke had also recovered as he watched the performance of the two in fear. He glanced at his two teammates and they shared a moment of understanding. All three edged towards the door. The elder green ninja suddenly turned to them, a large smile plastered on his face, giving them the thumbs up before returning to hug his students. Naruto knew that smiles were not meant to scare people, but he wondered why this one sent a shiver down his spine, while trying to think of a way to deal with these kinds of people. He walked up to them trying to interrupt loud yelling of the names of Guy and Lee. "Can you please keep it in private?" he asked the two ninja. Their companions, who had followed them to the dojo, immediately understood what Naruto meant and also what he thought of their teammates. Guy and Lee however did not get what he thought of them. "Why should we not share our flames of youth with the rest of Konoha?" he asked. Naruto just stared dumbly and decided this was what Kurenai had described as a lost cause. One quick hand motion and all three were off at a speed that would have impressed even the fastest of the Konoha Junin. Guy however was not impressed. Neji however had a sinking feeling that if he ever came into contact with this team, he would be more than worse for wear. They stopped just outside the examination room, breathing heavily. They had managed to escape the terrible trio. Naruto had the sinking feeling that if they ever came into contact with that team that they would be worse for wear. They walked into the room and paused in shock. "That many?" Sasuke breathed while Naruto looked around with anticipation. There were some interesting people in this exam, and Naruto intended to make the most of it. Sasuke noted this and shook his head in defeat. Naruto was now more curious than ever, and even his encounter with the green men had not dulled his curiosity. He was like a kid in candy store. They heard a voice and looked over to see a platinum blonde latch herself onto Sasuke. Sasuke for his part appeared none too pleased. "We missed you so much, Sasuke, you should have stayed in contact, we could have had so much fun," she cooed in his ear. Sasuke then attempted to pry her off him with a free hand. This action however was not needed as a pink-haired woman yanked the blonde and deposited her on the ground. The blonde looked up in shock at Sakura, who just smirked at her before turning her attention to Sasuke. Sasuke just stared. She was definitely different than she was before, but he was sure not in a good way. She slid up next to him and put one hand on the back of his neck and she began to use the other hand to stroke his inner thigh. Sasuke just grabbed her probing hand as well as her neck and shoved her away. As she tried to get closer once again, she felt cold metal links brush the back of her neck. She turned and saw Naruto, his features devoid of the usual cheerfulness. In its place was a look of confusion. Naruto wondered why she continued to do this. She should know by now that Sasuke would never even consider her anything more than an annoyance, Naruto had asked after a week of Sakura's as well as others' constant bugging of him for dates etc. Naruto also wondered why she did the same thing over and over, with the same result, although never this forward. "Why are you doing something that you know will never work?" he asked in confusion and a hint of annoyance. Sakura glared at him in disdain, deciding that he was not even worth answering. She instead turned back to Sasuke. "You may have him tamed, but you are far too good for him, come to me instead." I can make sure that you will like it, she purred to Sasuke, whose eyes had just continued to get wider and wider with every word. By the end of it no words could be spoken. Sakura, content with what she had said, turned back to her teammates, Kiba and Shino, who both appeared both shocked at Sakura and apologetic at Naruto and Sasuke. They were well aware of her views towards both Naruto and Sasuke. Even if they did not agree with them, she was their teammate. Hinata, however, was not happy with developments. She strode forward and grabbed a hunk of Sakura's hair. Sakura, unaware of what had occurred, shrieked. Hinata leveled a kunai at her eye and whispered in her ear. If you ever say anything like that to Naruto again, I will kill you, and you know that no one will care if I do, she said softly. Sakura glared at her, her fear rescinding now that she knew that her life was in no immediate danger. Hinata released her and walked back to Naruto and Sasuke, while the whole room's attention was on them. Naruto had a huge smile on his face. That was so cool, you should have seen her expression, he exclaimed. Sasuke also had a smirk on his face. They had both enjoyed what Hinata had done to Sakura. Hinata, however, barely noticed Sasuke's approval as she smiled at Naruto's approval, while making a mental note that Naruto liked aggressive women. You are certainly making a racket, a voice behind them was heard. They turned around to see a rather unremarkable-looking genin who wore glasses. It would be in your best interest to calm down and try and look inconspicuous as you are the rookies, although that might be a little difficult, he said with an urban tone, although the last bit was added with more of a mutter. You appear to know a fair bit about the exams, Hinata stated suspiciously. The genin shrugged sheepishly. Well, this is my 7th time in the exams. I should know a thing or two by now, he said sheepishly. He reached for his pockets and drew out a deck of cards. Naruto moved his head even closer in curiosity and the genin smiled indulgently. I am Kabuto, by the way, and do you know what these are? He asked. Without waiting for a reply, he continued. These are ninja cards and they hold information on nearly every genin taking part in the exams as well as other useful bits of information. Kabuto demonstrated with a display of the elemental countries and the amount of genin participating. Both Sasuke and Hinata were impressed with the information presented while Naruto just thought that the cards were cool. I also have specific information on most of the genin, Kabuto continued to brag. Just how long have you had to prepare this information? Hinata asked curiously. This is my 7th exam, Kabuto replied sheepishly. Hinata lip curled in derision but however did not speak another word. She did not need to. How can you suck that bad? Naruto asked with a frown. Kabuto appeared startled with the blunt question but just shrugged. They were interrupted by the arrival of a group of individuals who gave off a vicious aura. All the genin immediately quietened while the scared man who appeared to be in charge surveyed the room. Line up maggots and pick a number before reporting to your assigned seat. He yelled to the assembled genin, motioning towards the bowl filled with numbers. The genin all began to line up. Several minutes later, all the genin were seated and glancing at his surroundings. Naruto head whipped around looking at all the proctors for the exams. He had never seen a stranger assortment of people. Ibiki tapped the chalk on the board twice for silence and all genin looked expectantly at the board. He turned to his left and noticed that he was seated next to Sakura, who refused to look at him. He shrugged and looked at the board. The rules are the same as the series. Begin, Ibiki roared. All the genin began to work on their tests. Naruto began to read through the questions and realized that he could not answer a single one. He knew that he was no genius when it came to school work, so he just looked around and decided to sleep. He would just wait for the 10th question. Sakura just looked to the side and saw Naruto sleeping. She shook her head in disgust. People like him deserve to die, she muttered angrily before beginning to work on the questions. Hinata looked at the sleeping Naruto. What the hell does he think he is doing? She thought to herself. She shook her head and began to work on the test. 45 minutes pass. Ibiki surveyed the room, mentally weighing up the remaining. He could have guessed what techniques that most of the remaining genin had used to gather the required information. All that is except one who had slept through nearly the entire test. Ibiki wondered for a moment that he had found out what the test would be about, but dismissed the idea. He nodded slightly at the proctors and proceeded to announce the final question. I will announce the final question. But before I do, I will now add a few more rules. The first is that any who fail will immediately be ineligible for future exams. Ibiki said with a vicious edge. Many of the contestants gulped. However, if you refuse to take the final question you will be eligible for future exams, he continued. Many of the genin began to murmur amongst themselves. Silence, now choose, Ibiki interrupted the murmuring. There was silence before some of the participants began to raise their hands. Several more soon followed. Just as the genin choosing to leave the exam were becoming more frequent, a yawn was heard throughout the room. All eyes turned to Naruto, who for his part just covered his mouth with his hand in a vain attempt at manners. Sorry, just a little bored here, he said with a bored expression. Can you please hurry it up, this is no fun at all, and I have already looked at all the interesting people here, he continued. The whole room looked at him with incredulous expressions. The collective thought was something along the lines of how could he be so calm. However, many hands that were beginning to rise went down. Ibiki noticed this and sighed. There goes his fun. We will announce the 10th question, he said. All the genin leaned forward in anticipation. Ibiki looked around once more. You pass, he yelled. Each and every genin was dumbfounded. Naruto just sighed in disappointment at how boring it turned out. He turned out and looked out the window, and what he saw shocked him. Launching towards the window was a mysterious black ball. Naruto started to rise just as it crashed through the window. Kunai loosened from the ball to reveal an attractive woman standing in front of a huge sign that announced that her name was Mitarashi Anko. That was so cool, Naruto yelled. Anko looked at the chained blonde and grinned. He is definitely my kind of kid. Plus the chains just look cool, she thought after a moment before announcing herself to the class. Naruto looked on in rapture at her lively introduction. Hinata also noticed way Naruto looked at Anko and fumed. How dare that brazen hussy tempt Naruto, she thought. Her inner monologue was interrupted however by Anko announcing that they were to meet at Training Ground 44 the following morning. Naruto rose to leave and noticed that Hinata was walking towards him. He moved next to her and they walked out together with Sasuke joining them outside. I am unsure about Sakura and what she will do, Hinata announced when they were outside. Sasuke nodded. He too was unsure about Sakura. Naruto appeared unconcerned. Hinata continued, I believe that it would be best for the three of us to stay together for the night. Hinata said, looking specifically at Naruto, daring him to refuse. Sasuke, being more than aware of Hinata's intentions, smirked. I should be right, it appears that Sakura, despite her change in attitude, she still retains some of her old tendencies, Sasuke said with a pause in the middle. Hinata's eyes widened at his statement before inclining her head slightly in thanks. She often had cause to thank her luck with teens. Naruto looked at the interactions between the two in confusion. Hinata then turned back to Naruto. Do you agree with this? She asked forcefully. Naruto just stared. He had never done anything like this before so he was curious. He then remembered what Kurenai had told him. I had better ask Kurenai, he replied, and both Sasuke and Hinata just raised their eyebrows in response. I live at her house, he explained, and Sasuke nodded, not caring too much about his eccentric teammates' living arrangements. Hinata was however weighing up her options. One was that he was living with a beautiful woman and he was an innocent boy, and the other was that that woman was her teacher and could easily provide assistance. Hinata decided to follow the second option. I am sure that Kurenai will agree when she hears our reasons. Hinata told him. Which are? He asked. Sakura, Hinata finished. Naruto shrugged and Hinata's eyes narrowed. Crush or not, she did not take no for an answer. Naruto however continued. If she wants to hurt us, we kill her, he continued in his usual voice. Even tough they knew about Naruto's lack of compassion with regards to enemies, it still unnerved both of them, although Hinata had a slightly adoring look on her face. Sasuke noticed this and sighed. She was nearly as scary. Better to be safe, she insisted and Naruto shrugged. He did not mind the idea all that much. That night, Hinata had informed her family that she would be away at Naruto's place for the night and they had shown no objection. Kurenai also had suspicions as to why Hinata had asked for this to happen but did not interfere. She thought that it was cute, although she could not shake the feeling of annoyance whenever Hinata talked to Naruto. She however made no objection and it was a quiet night. The next morning, they arrived at Training Ground 44 the next morning and looked around at the other genin. They all glanced at the caged area in trepidation. all except Naruto, who looked there expectantly. He knew that he was going to have fun in there. Just then Anko sauntered into the area. "Well maggots, let's get this over with," she yelled to all genin assembled. They all started at her loud first words as they all turned towards her. Anko withdrew several consent forms from her jacket and waved them in the air. "Fill in these consent forms, liability for your deaths will be annoying," she continued in a much calmer voice. An audible gulp could be heard throughout the genin. The feeling of trepidation was interrupted however by a loud blonde. "Hurry up, this is boring," he yelled. Many of the genin glared at him while others, who remembered him from the first side. Anko just smiled malevolently at the young blonde before launching a kunai at him, slicing his cheek. She then appeared behind him, preparing to lick his cheek. She felt something slide up her leg and looked down, noticing a chain sliding out his cloths. Naruto turned his head, his regular smile looking a little more venomous. "This looks like fun," was all he said. Anko was saved from replying by feeling a presence behind her. "Maybe later, kid," she whispered as she turned around. Naruto sighed in disappointment and busied himself with observing the forest, noticing the occasional wild beast. Soon his contemplation was interrupted by Anko announcing that the exams were to begin and that they were to report to their assigned gate. He rushed to his assigned gate along with Hinata and Sasuke. Unknown to Naruto, his tenant was also rather excited to be going into training area 44, although for slightly different reasons. The gate opened and Team 7 ran forward into the forest. All three were excited at the prospect of action, especially Sasuke. Naruto however was just looking forward to having some fun. The incident with Anko earlier had led him to believe that something interesting would happen. Hinata wanted to show to Naruto just what she was capable of. All three began to search for another team, hoping to surprise them. Kiba and Shino watched as Sakura rushed through the forest, intent on her prey. They each exchanged a glance and gave a collective sigh. They were well of her obsession with both Naruto and Sasuke. They were also aware of her receiving special training from outside sources and were not too happy about it. Neither was Kakeshi, although he could do nothing about it. The orders came from higher up. "Kiba!" Sakura yelled. Kiba nodded and all three stopped. He sniffed the air twice, his expression turned surprised. "It's faint but it's coming from that way." He pointed to the east. Sakura nodded and smiled maliciously. They then quickly planned a basic attack strategy and began pursuit, Kiba leading the way. Team 7 rushed through the forest in A versus formation, searching for a freshwater supply. They could not find any teams nearby where they had started, and had decided to look for a freshwater supply and plan the rest of their day. Naruto, bored at the lack of action, began to daydream. "Pay attention," Sasuke hissed at Naruto. Naruto's eyes sharpened at Sasuke's chastisement and turned forward once again, chains beginning to loosen. Sasuke sighed and looked to the heavens, wondering once again how Naruto could be so inattentive. Hinata then made a discreet hand signal, which both Sasuke and Naruto acknowledged. "You hear something?" Kiba asked Shino, who shook his head. Kiba did not bother asking Sakura as she was intent on her prey, oblivious to her surroundings. "I have a bad feeling about this," he muttered quietly. Shino, who had heard him, silently agreed. Several minutes later, "Now!" Hinata yelled as Kiba came charging towards them using his Gatsuga from behind. Less than surprised, Sasuke dodged to the left while Hinata ran forward. Only Naruto, who had the best defensive shills due to his chains, met the attack. Naruto, continually extending his chains, allowed them wrap around Kiba before jumping backwards. He continued to extend his chains. Kiba noticed the chains and cursed. He had noticed instantly that Team 7 had been expecting them but had not expected Naruto to be able to control his chains like this. To prove his point, Akamaru was also bound in chains. Sakura, who had followed Kiba for the assault, charged in for Naruto when she had seen Kiba become tied up in Naruto's chains. Her attack however was interrupted by several kunai thrown at her by Sasuke. She had no time to think about this however, as when she had rolled to the side Hinata charged in, ready to attack. Sakura jumped back trying to avoid the Hyuga and trying to think of an alternate strategy, as retreat was now impossible. Sasuke turned his head back towards Shino, whose body was beginning to be covered in bugs. Sasuke remembered Kurenai's lessons in dealing with an Aburame and began to form the seals for a Kaiden. Gukakyu no Jutsu. Shino's eyes widened, his only noticeable reaction, as he recognized the seals. He stopped sending out his bugs and drew them back into his body and jumped backwards, away from his team, in the hope of protecting his bugs. He could not afford to send his bugs out in the current situation. He would have to wait until Sasuke showed an opening. Sasuke smirked as he aimed his jutsu a little higher and glanced back at Naruto. He knew that his current plan would not defeat Shino. That however was not a problem, as his job was not to defeat Shino, but to remove him from the group enough to be unable to provide assistance. Hinata also smirked as she attacked a weakening Sakura once again. When the fight had begun, Sakura had attempted to cast a genjutsu, which was dispelled easily by Hinata. Sakura's panic and shock that their surprise attack had not been effective, as well as Hinata's constant barrage, had prevented Sakura from mounting an effective counterattack and had also injured her slightly. Hinata then managed to place a well-timed Juken strike to her stomach and felt a wave of satisfaction as Sakura winced and jumped back. She noticed Naruto begin to form some hand seals and a slight smile adorned her face. Naruto formed several hand seals and looked at Kiba. "Do you want to give up?" he asked. Kiba's curses in response to this told Naruto that this was a no. "This is going to hurt," he continued in a pleasant tone, which belied the malicious smile that was forming in on his face. Kurenai had always told him to be polite after all. He performed the final hand seal. "Keigoku Kusari no Jutsu, punishment chain," he said, deadly smile now in full force. Kiba began to scream as the chains became red hot, tearing into his skin. Both Sakura and Shino stopped their attack and looked at Kiba. Hinata and Sasuke also halted their attacks and addressed their opponents. "Your scroll, now," they both said. "Never," Sakura snarled. She was not going to pass up this opportunity to cleanse Konoha of the demon. While Hinata did not show it, she was disgusted at Sakura's actions. However, she once again focused on Naruto and shivered with excitement as she watched him smile viciously while he made Kiba scream in pain. Shino, however, was not so zealous about victory and held up his hands in surrender. Sasuke nodded and told him to place it on the ground slowly. Shino did so and Sasuke motioned him to join Sakura, which Shino hastened to do. All this was done so as Kiba's screams echoed throughout the area as Naruto moved the red-hot chains. Sakura stood in a stalemate with Hinata. She knew that she could not beat her in a direct attack in her current condition. Her thoughts as to what to do were interrupted, however, when Shino appeared next to her and placed a restraining hand on her shoulder. He motioned towards Kiba, who was no longer screaming but rather moaning, fading in and out of consciousness, and no longer bound in chains, but rather on the ground. Hinata noticed Sasuke approaching Naruto and began to step back, chuckling at Sakura's expression. When she reached her two teammates, she smirked and looked at him moaning Kiba. Giving of a half-amused, half-disgusted snort, she motioned her two teammates to leave and all three left the rest of Team 8 to aid Kiba with his injuries. Shino and Sakura bandaged up Kiba and once again shuddered at his injuries. They both had trouble believing that one genin could cause this kind of damage. Third-degree burns marked nearly his entire body and he was bleeding from most of these. "Filthy demon," Sakura muttered once again. Shino, however, while he could intellectually understand his motives, could only shudder at what he had experienced to cause him to be able to inflict this much pain on someone. Team 7 stopped at the bank of a stream and fell to the ground exhausted. They were more than pleased over the result over the failed ambush conducted by Team 8. "I guess Kurenai was right when she said that when an ambush is expected it becomes an ambush for the attacker," Hinata said. Sasuke nodded and grunted and Naruto lay on the ground panting, chains once again wrapped around his torso. Hinata had a brief mental image of her wrapped in those chains along with Naruto and shook her head to rid herself of the image. She looked up at the sky and made a few calculations about the time. "I believe that it would be best for us to rest the night," she said. Sasuke nodded in agreement, as did Naruto, who promptly curled up, ready to sleep. Sasuke and Hinata both shook their heads in resigned annoyance, less than surprised or impressed at his lack of preparation. In some ways he was the worst ninja in the exam. Sasuke offered to take the first watch and Hinata agreed to take the second as they settled in to rest. The next day, Team 7 once again made their way through the forest, intent on the tower that marked the center of the training area. All three were confident of their completion of the second part of the exam and were not expecting trouble. Hinata still however had her Byakugan active and noticed a snake coming towards them at a rapid pace. Now, Hinata yelled once again as they employed a slightly different strategy. Both Sasuke and Hinata broke off to quickly defeat one of their opponents while Naruto guarded against the others. A risky strategy, but it was the one they chose to go with. However, as they searched for the opposing team, all they could see was a lone genin standing on an above branch, wearing a superior smirk. "I've come for you, Sasuke," the genin crooned. A sudden cry of pain was heard and both Hinata and Sasuke turned to see Naruto being crushed and then swallowed by the giant snake. "Naruto!" Hinata cried, and Sasuke's face also registered shock and concern. They had no time to be concerned however, as they both heard the strange genin charge at them, his tongue extending. They barely avoided his attack as they rolled to the side and got into ready positions. They glanced at the snake to see if it would attack, but it was just savoring its last meal. They looked once again at their attacker. "Definitely not a genin," Sasuke said with clenched teeth. Hinata nodded in agreement. Both Sasuke and Hinata could feel the killing intent the strange ninja was directing at them. Sweat began to creep down their faces and Sasuke gave an audible gulp as the killing intent began to rise. Sasuke looked slightly at Hinata to see that she was faring slightly better than he was. "We better be careful," Sasuke whispered to Hinata, who nodded absently. She was concerned for Naruto. Naruto looked around the insides of the snake in bewilderment. He knew that he was curious about new things, but he did not like this one bit. Naruto wondered how he could get out of the snake's stomach when he remembered one of his earlier lessons from Kurenai when she had been asking them about their current jutsu knowledge. The day after he had told her that he could not perform a simple bushin, she had demonstrated what she had called a cage bushin, which he could perform. Kurenai, Hinata and Sasuke had looked on in shock as he performed it again and again. Naruto just thought that it was fun to do something new. Naruto thought he would give it a try and made the required hand seal and began focusing his chakra. Outside the snake, Sasuke and Hinata were having a difficult time in dealing with their attacker. At one point Sasuke had screamed out to it to ask him who it was, and the only response they had gotten was a hissed Orochimaru. Both Hinata and Sasuke were initially disbelieving as they recognized that name, but now they were not so sure. They both wondered if it could really be him. Their attention however was drawn away from the fight by something that sounded like an explosion. They turned to see hundreds of Naruto dispelling and one wiping his sleeve with a disgusted expression. Orochimaru looked at him in interest. "I believe that I can let Sasuke wait a little while I play with you," he said with a leering smile. He turned and looked at Naruto, who had the beginnings of feral grin on his face. Hinata saw that grin and felt her knees go weak. Sasuke however had a different opinion of the current situation. "Don't you dare ignore me," he growled and began to charge. Orochimaru turned his head and grinned before raising his arm. Snakes came out of his sleeves and lunged at Sasuke, who could do nothing but raise his arms in self-defense. The snakes coiled around his torso and up his neck. Several of the snakes bite into his neck and Sasuke cried out "I pain" briefly before falling into the ground. Orochimaru looked at Hinata then. "Look after him, little Hyuga. I have business with him later," Orochimaru said to Hinata, who just glared at him and said nothing, knowing that she was outmatched. Orochimaru then turned to Naruto, who had began to run forward, chains extended. Orochimaru grinned and got into a ready stance, still completely relaxed. Hinata watched on in growing excitement at the fact that Naruto would begin combat. Kyuubi watched on through Naruto's eyes in growing excitement. She knew that the corrupted seal that the fourth placed would not last Naruto using her chakra again, and the Raikon Banbingu Kusari, soul binding chain, seal had one specific purpose. One that she was going to take advantage of. Naruto felt his control slipping. The more he fought, the less he felt. The edge of his vision tinged red as he continued to attack. In the back of his mind he knew that Orochimaru was playing with him, but that did not matter. All that mattered was the fight. The adrenaline running through his system. The thrill of the eventual kill. He grinned maniacally and rushed in once more after getting knocked back by Orochimaru. Orochimaru, while he had had fun at the beginning, was getting bored. The boy did not seem to possess any interesting jutsu other than his chains, and also was rather immune to pain. All he did was laugh and attack him again. He decided to end it and launched his tongue at Naruto and curling it around his throat. Grin still in place, he unconsciously called for more demonic chakra. Kyuubi happily complied, knowing what it would lead to. Orochimaru had Naruto by the neck with his tongue and was dragging him quickly towards himself when he noticed that there was a red glow at Naruto's stomach. The red glow shone through his shirt. Orochimaru decided to wait a little to see what would happen. Kyuubi continued to feed chakra into Naruto for him to use. Kyuubi could not believe her luck. The opponent that Naruto had was what she had hoped for. Orochimaru had the right character and strength for her to continue to feed Naruto the chakra he needed. If the current trend kept up, her plans could be achieved very soon. Naruto had after all used up all of his natural chakra and was now using only hers. Naruto was beyond rational thought. He only lived for the moment. Hinata and Sasuke watched on in surprise as his speed and strength increased, although both could see that Orochimaru was only playing with him. They also noticed the glow and were concerned. Hinata could see his chakra doing strange things. Kyuubi sealed the 2 chains to her wrists and smirked. She could not believe that now was the time that she would be freed, but it was the case. She smirked as she took hold of the steel gates and pushed. The spiritual shifted to the physical as Kyuubi began to tear away at skin. Naruto, in the middle of dashing towards Orochimaru, felt a searing pain in his gut, and rational thought came rushing back. "What is this?" he gasped as he clenched his eyes shut and began to scream. Hinata and Sasuke watched in morbid fascination as glowing red hands tore his stomach open. The hands became arms, which soon curled and were placed on the ground and pushing upwards. A glowing head was then seen, and what looked to be a female body was dragging itself out of Naruto's stomach, despite his cries. The odd thing was that his chains were attached to her wrists. Soon, a small torso was on the ground next to Naruto. The body was growing rapidly and the glowing subsiding. Hinata, Sasuke and Orochimaru watched in fascination. Soon the glowing had stopped and there sat a woman who appeared in her early 20s, with long, straight red hair. The woman rose and stretched her arms and legs, before noticing the chains and glancing back at Naruto, who was moaning in pain. The huge tear in his stomach had begun to heal, but the wound was far too large to be healed in time. The woman knelt down beside him and her hands once again began to glow. She placed them on his stomach and his moans of pain stopped, as Naruto then passed out. She then removed her hands when he was healed. "You are lucky that I find you interesting," she said in a regal tone to the unconscious blonde as she rose and turned to Orochimaru, who had looked on in great curiosity. "You must be his tenant," he said in a sibilant voice. Kyuubi nodded and then responded with an order. "Your purpose had been served, you may leave," she said in a superior voice. Orochimaru narrowed his eyes, however his voice still contained the same tone. "Would you like to join me? I have need of individuals such as yourself," he responded. Kyuubi just narrowed her eyes at the nerve of the fool. He clearly needed education on who his superiors were. She raised her hand and looked at Orochimaru. He tensed but looked confident. This confident demeanor however faltered as he felt his body become heavy. He looked down and saw that his body was engulfed in hazy red chakra. He jumped back but it was still surrounding him. He had no time to try to avoid it however as Kyuubi clenched her hand into a fist and he felt it tear into him. "Guess I must go all out," he gasped as he opened his mouth and prepared to let loose his true body. Kyuubi watched in boredom as a huge white snake launched itself out of his mouth. Orochimaru charged in the hopes of killing her before she could repeat her earlier performance. This however did not bother her as she molded a sword out of chakra and slashed horizontally, cutting him in half. Kyuubi then disregarded him and began to inspect her chains. Sasuke and Hinata both watched in shock. This woman had just dispatched Orochimaru easily and was attached to Naruto. They were not sure whether or not she was friend or foe. Hinata however was more concerned that this woman was attached to her Naruto. "Who are you?" she snarled at the red-haired woman. The woman looked at her with a superior yet bored look. "You may address me as Kyuubi," she responded, half amused by their expressions of disbelief. She then turned back to Naruto and began to work on separating the chains from each other. She looked down at her own wrists and nodded absently before dabbing her fingers in Naruto's blood that had bled out over his body. "They expected this to hold me," she said in a superior tone as she altered the seal slightly. She could not remove it, but she could make it near irrelevant. Her work complete in a matter of minutes, she then took hold of both chains with the opposing hands and tore them out. They were tossed to the ground next to him. She then turned to Sasuke. "Playtime now, Uchiha," she crooned to Sasuke. Sasuke blanched at her cruel smile. Hinata also crouched into a ready stance. Kyuubi merely walked towards them, her nude body showing no reaction to the elements. Hinata and Sasuke both launched themselves at her. Kyuubi, however, just swayed to the left and backhanded Hinata to the jaw, which sent her flying into a tree and gave her a concussion. Sasuke tried to follow up with a roundhouse kick. His kick, however, was caught by Kyuubi and her other hand gripped his throat. Before he could react, she sent pulses of demonic chakra through his body, and his screams could be heard. "An Uchiha made a fool out of me a long time ago, so now it's time for me to have my fun," she whispered. Sasuke whimpered as he felt another wave of pain course through him. "Lucky for you that you are his descendant, or I would really have some fun, but since you are, I will just do this," she continued and pressed a hand hard into his stomach. The last thing that Sasuke felt before passing out was the pain of his genitals exploding. Kyuubi looked at her handiwork and smiled. She had not killed him but had a little fun. What should have been Sasuke was a bloody near-female body. Kyuubi chuckled. The exercise had put her extensive knowledge of both the female and male anatomy to good use. A little more surgery was all that was needed. She absently wondered what she would look like when it was done. She then walked to Naruto and looked down at him. "We will meet again," she said softly before walking into the forest and away from Konoha. Sometime later, Hinata opened her eyes, looked around groggily. Her eyes soon came upon the form of Naruto. She immediately rushed over and tried to awaken him, but to no avail. Seeing that it was no good, she then looked over for Sasuke to see if he could help. What she saw was even worse, and she did not even try to wake him. Instead, she searched through her pack for a scroll. Found it, she thought as she opened it and bit her thumb and smearing the blood over the scroll. A burst of smoke revealed a firework of sorts. "I hope this works," she prayed silently as she fired it into the sky through a hole in the canopy and went back to tending Naruto, as she was unsure whether or not to touch Sasuke in his condition. She waited with her unconscious teammates for help to arrive. In the hospital, Hinata and Kurenai sat next to Naruto in his room. Sasuke was being treated in the emergency room for severe injuries. Naruto, however, seemed to only be suffering from chakra exhaustion, despite his ordeal. Just then the doctor walked into the room and motioned for Kurenai to join him. "To be blunt, I am not sure what happened. What I can tell you is that, well, Sasuke is all but a female. However, we will need your permission to operate since you are responsible for him," the doctor said. Kurenai just stood there. "A girl?" she asked. The doctor nodded. Kurenai swayed back for a moment before making a gesture towards her lower regions. "Female," he confirmed. Kurenai breathed out. The doctor decided to continue. "Sasuke's skeletal structure as well as biological functions are slowly changing. We estimate that in about 6 months' time his body will be female, but surgery is needed. However, if the surgery is not done, then Sasuke will most likely die," the doctor explained. Kurenai nodded and gave the doctor the okay to perform the surgery. He nodded and left. Kurenai sat down and took several deep breaths. Hinata also looked shocked. After several minutes in shock, Kurenai rose. "I will report to the Hokage," she said, while looking down at Naruto worriedly. "I will be right back," she continued at the door, although to who Hinata could not tell. Kurenai faced the aging Hokage, her face drawn into a tired frown. Sarutobi had his head in his hands, cursing whatever he could think of. "Hinata knew far too many details for it to be a lie," Kurenai said softly. Sarutobi nodded, not saying a word. Kurenai took the hint and remained silent. After several minutes he rose from his desk. Kurenai looked up in expectation. He motioned her to follow. They walked down several corridors and came across a regular-looking door. The Hokage bit into his thumb, drawing blood, and pressed it into the door. The wood absorbed the blood. The door opened slightly. "What you see does not leave this room," he warned. Kurenai nodded, already far too used to secrets. Walking into the darkened room, she looked around. It was empty except for a single table which held a single scroll. Sarutobi walked around the table to one side and unrolled the scroll. Kurenai stood opposite him and watched the scroll in fascination. She began. The Hokage nodded. Everything you need to know about Raikon Banbingu Kusari, he answered, falling into the role of benevolent teacher unconsciously. Kurenai looked at the scroll and realized she was out of her depth, so she waited for her Hokage to finish. His eyes swept over the scroll, searching for something about links. Found it, he muttered as he focused more intently. After several minutes he looked up, his expression a mix of elation and defeat. Kurenai found it to be the strangest mix. As I said before, none of this leaves the room, he said to Kurenai. She nodded in response. He sighed, gathered his thoughts, and looked at the ceiling. Well, we know the Kyuubi has escaped, and according to this she has full access to her powers. However, they should still have a connection, just a spiritual one, he said. Kurenai waited for a moment, absorbing the information. So what you are saying is that she not only has full access to her chakra, but can still influence Naruto, she said, her voice tense. Her emotions were frayed from the exam and this final bit of information had pushed her to near breaking point. No more than she could before, he said in a placating tone. Kurenai huffed, her mood not getting any better. Your team is as of now, suspended from active duty until further notice. He ordered. He then continued in a softer tone. I want you to aid them in any way you can, he said. Kurenai nodded and left the room quickly. Sarutobi sighed and stared back at the scroll. There was one thing he had not told Kurenai. According to the scroll, Kyuubi should have been able to break both the links, not just the physical one. He shook his head in confusion and left the room as well, sealing the door behind him. Kurenai walked back into the observation room, where she could see below her the operation. Across the small room sat a doctor, who was avidly taking notes. She recognized him as one of the head doctors in the hospital. She walked over to him. The doctor looked up as he heard someone approach. Are you the person responsible for her? He asked, indicating the operation below. Kurenai shuddered at the gender reference but nodded. He put down his pen and motioned for her to sit. She did so and kept her eyes focused on the surgery in morbid fascination. The doctor tapped her shoulder to get her attention and began to explain what was going to be done. When he had finished, she just absorbed the information for a moment. So she is going to be in an induced coma for about 2 months while you do all the necessary operations. She said slowly. The doctor nodded, thankful for an understanding person. Kurenai stared back down at Sasuke for a very long time before she got up and left, all the while the doctor continued to take notes. Hinata wiped down Naruto's body with a damp cloth slowly. A nurse who had come in to check on him had noticed that she looked more than a little unsettled. The nurse also noticed the worried look that she had when she looked at Naruto that went beyond friendship. With a small smile that all elder people reserved for the trials and tribulations of the young, she had asked Hinata to help her with the patient. The nurse had quietly left the room with a satisfied smile over what had happened and a backward glance at Hinata, who was washing down Naruto. Hiyashi and Noriko walked down the hospital halls, taking note of the numbers. Both were in no rush as they had been assured that Hinata was in no danger. They approached the room that Hinata was in and opened the door slowly. Hiyashi stopped when he saw what Hinata was doing. Having a sense of propriety, he briefly glanced at his second wife. She nodded in understanding and walked in while Hiyashi waited outside. Noriko walked in and Hinata glanced up in surprise. Seeing who it was, she jerked her hand away in embarrassment. Hinata began to try and explain herself but could not find the words as her face continued to get redder and redder. Noriko permitted herself a brief smile and tried to calm her down. After several moments, Hinata calmed down and her face returned to its normal color. It is a woman's duty to care for her significant other, Noriko reiterated carefully, making sure to omit the word wife. Hinata nodded again and sighed in relief. She turned to Naruto and straightened his cloths before turning back to her stepmother. I assume that it is time to leave, she said. Noriko nodded in response and Hinata made to leave. However, as she was walked past, Noriko grabbed her shoulder. However, that earlier display was not acceptable, she said softly. Hinata's face once again turned red, although this time it was from shame. Hinata accepted the admonishment with a nod. Noriko nodded and let go of her shoulder. She said a soft goodbye to Naruto, knowing that he would not hear her, and left. Hinata greeted her father softly and the three of them walked towards the Hyuga estate in dignified silence. Kurenai stalked through the hospital halls in silence. She was pissed at the moment. She was pissed at the Hokage, Jiraiya and the Kyuubi. However, she was more upset with herself than with anything else. Despite how many times she told herself that she could not have stopped it. Soon she arrived at Naruto's room and opened the door. He lay on the bed quietly sleeping. She sat on the chair next to the bed and placed a hand on his forehead. She gazed down onto his face. Even in sleep he looks honest, she whispered. In a village of ninja, where deception was as natural as breathing, his smiling honesty was a breath of fresh air. She looked at his chains which were neatly rolled under the bed. She allowed her hands to wander. The chains were cold in her palms. Picking the chain up, she ran her hand down it slowly, checking for changes. It looked the same as before. She reached the end of the chain with a sigh. Still holding the chain, she leaned forward and kissed him softly on the forehead. Naruto moaned slightly and she felt the chains shift in her hands. Staring in bewilderment at her hands, she softly smiled. It looks like he hasn't changed that much, she whispered to herself, willing herself to believe it to be the truth. Sasuke lay on her bed, sleeping a dreamless sleep. Her body was swollen from the corrective surgery. Numerous tubes had been fed into her body. This was the image that confronted Sakura. She looked at Sasuke in horror. The nurse who had accompanied Sakura looked at her with concern but did not make a comment. When a ninja with connections such as hers came in, the best thing a person should do is to be as invisible as possible. Sakura looked at Sasuke with growing disbelief. "Leave us," she said softly to the nurse. The nurse hesitated, unsure of what to do. Sakura, noticing that the nurse had not moved, whirled around and glared viciously at her. The nurse, while not particularly intimidated by the glare, knew that it would be a bad sign for her continued employment if she remained. With a nod, the nurse left the room. Sakura looked back down on the unconscious Sasuke. Her dreams, ambitions had been shattered. And the only person she could think to blame was Naruto. He was the only person who would have hurt her like this. She leaned over Sasuke's body and examined every inch, not missing her lack of a male organ. "I have to stop it," she whispered. Looking at the tubes, she narrowed her eyes, immediately making the assumption that this was what was changing her beloved Sasuke into a female. She grabbed hold of the cords one at a time and started pulling them out. Unfortunately, the first cord she pulled out was the one that was putting Sasuke in a coma. Sakura heard a murmur when she had finished pulling out the third tube. Looking up, she noticed that Sasuke's were beginning to open. "Don't worry, I will make sure that you are all better," she cooed softly. Sasuke, however, did not hear her. Sasuke's eyes widened as her memories came flooding back. With a yell, she looked down. Even more memories came crashing down on her. Incapable of words, all Sasuke could do was scream. It was almost animalistic in not only its rage, but also its despair. She tore at the tubes, smashed the machines, anything that could try to decrease the pain. Needless to say that it all was futile. Sakura cowered back, fearful of Sasuke's rage. The nurse who had just left rushed through the door, syringe in hand, accompanied by several orderlies. They held her down while the nurse administered the relaxant. Gradually Sasuke stopped thrashing around and settled into a slumber. Breathing heavily, the orderlies let her go and let out a sigh of relief. Patting each other on the back, they moved to the door. The nurse, however, motioned them to stay. "Remove her as well," she said, pointing to a cowering Sakura with disgust. Sakura struggled against the orderlies removing her, and it eventually took all four holding a limb each to get her out of the room. Once she was out, the nurse locked the door behind her and flicked on the isolation light. She went over to the sleeping Sasuke and fixed up all the medical equipment. "I should not have left you alone," she said softly, more to herself than to Sasuke. Sakura was dumped unceremoniously in the waiting room with firm orders to leave the hospital. Pouting but realizing that there was not much that could be done about it, she stood up and left the hospital in a huff, intending to report the matter to her mother. Haruka listened to her daughter tell her of the incident at the hospital. She had no doubt that the story had been edited but took the basic facts as they were. She did not, however, share her daughter's love of the Uchiha. To Haruka, the Uchiha was nothing more than a stepping stone. She was someone that could be used to increase her own personal power. She knew that Sasuke could still be used, it was just that it would be a lot easier if Sasuke had stayed as a male. However, she did share her daughter's dislike of Naruto. Haruka dismissed her daughter and thought over what she had heard and what could be done. It would have been a lot easier to gain revenge on Naruto outside the village rather than inside. She sat at her desk and thought on it for a very long time. The next day, Haruka sat across from Sarutobi, outlining her concerns about Naruto. The basis for these was that since the Kyuubi had let Naruto live, then she would obviously be back for him, because she was a demon and he was her jailer. Sarutobi was not fooled for a minute that her primary concern was for the village, but was forced to concede the point. It was a valid concern. So what you say is that you want him out of the village for a period of time to make sure that if the Kyuubi came after him it would not harm the village, he clarified. Haruka nodded, allowing a slight smirk to grace her features. Sarutobi suppressed the urge to punch her in the face when he noticed the smirk. Instead he took a deep breath. He is in the hospital at the moment, so he will not be going anywhere, but you do have a point, and as soon as he has recovered I will assign him a mission that will be outside the village. He said to Haruka. Haruka, knowing that it was the best that she was going to get, left the room with a satisfied air about her. It was only once she had left that he ground his teeth. He could guess what she was planning but could do little to stop it. In the hospital, Naruto was eating with gusto. His nurse had looked at him with amused disbelief as he had scoffed down the hospital food. I didn't know that hospital food tasted that good, she had whispered to Kurenai, who had also laughed quietly. Kurenai smiled and watched him eat quietly. She did however notice that there was some rice attached to the side of his mouth. You missed some, she said in a kind tone as she reached over and got the rice with her index finger before placing it in her own. Naruto stopped eating and stared at her. She in turn looked at him, finger still in mouth. That felt nice, he said after a moment. Kurenai looked at him for a moment and then at herself. She quickly removed her finger from her mouth and laughed it off, not wanting to think about what a third person at the scene would have thought of it. Naruto, seeing her laughter, joined in and soon continued eating. However, the thought that went through her mind was at how natural it was for her to do it. Shaking her head, she put that thought out of her mind as well. 1 week later, Naruto waltzed out of the hospital with a swagger. Fully recovered, he was glad to be out. The hospital bored Naruto to tears. He had not been allowed to leave his room even when he had recovered. Behind him were both Hinata and Kurenai. Both had small smiled on their faces over his excitement. Hurry up Naruto, you have to report to the Hokage, Kurenai called as he ran forward. Yeah, he responded. Kurenai shook her head in mock exasperation. He was like a child. Naruto looked up towards the Hokage tower. Although still motivated by his instincts, he had since his release gained a sense of responsibility. Not a large one, but still a sense of responsibility. Sighing, he launched himself towards the tower. Kurenai turned towards Hinata with a smile. Thank you for coming Hinata, she said warmly. Hinata nodded, her smile fading. Hyuga dignity dictated that she not show her emotions, but she could not help herself when it came to Naruto. She found his innocence endearing and his capacity of violence arousing. Kurenai, noticing that Hinata had once again schooled her emotions, knew that there would be no idle conversation. She decided to get straight down to business. You will be receiving training from your family and only undertaking a minimal amount of lower-ranked missions while Sasuke is out of commission. Kurenai said to Hinata. Hinata nodded in understanding before leaving. Kurenai sighed. While she had had remarkable progress with Naruto and Sasuke, Hinata was still rather arrogant towards most people, and it was only her family and her teammates that she opened up and lost her Hyuga arrogance. Kurenai turned as well and made her way towards the Hokage tower. Naruto landed at the foot of the tower to find Kurenai waiting. With a sulky expression he walked past her and into the building. Giggling, Kurenai followed. The Hokage looked at Naruto with an amused smile. He wore a sulky expression while Kurenai stood behind him with an amused but not condescending smile. He shook his head and decided to give Naruto his orders. Since you have recovered, I have a mission for you, he said in a grandfather tone. Naruto immediately perked up, his sulky expression gone. Kurenai also looked on in interest. Sarutobi opened his drawer and pulled out a scroll. You are to hand this over to a man called Jiraiya. He can be found around the hot springs, Sarutobi said with a silent chuckle. He had his crystal ball specially prepared. Kurenai, however, no longer had a smile on his face. She could guess who he was delivering the scroll to and did not like where it was going. Naruto, however, was excited and did not wait. See ya. he said with a smile and a wave as he dashed out the door. Kurenai turned to face the Hokage, eyes blazing. He should not be associating with people like that, she said. Sarutobi just chuckled. You sound like an annoyed wife, he said with a chuckle. Kurenai huffed and stomped out, seeing that there was no arguing with him. Naruto landed in the woods just outside the bathhouses. Kurenai had always told him that you needed to listen and follow mission orders to the letter, and the Hokage had told him that this man would be around the hot springs, then this would be a good place to start. Readjusting his chains around his body, Naruto looked around. As he began to search, he heard a soft giggle coming from the fence and, with his curiosity aroused, made his way over to investigate. Soon enough he saw an older man peeking through a crack in the fence, giggling to himself, taking down notes the whole time. Walking up to him, he said in a normal tone, "Are you Jiraiya?" he asked. The man looked up at him in askance, already knowing what was coming. The wall separating the two from the bathhouse proper was torn down within milliseconds, only to reveal a plethora of women behind it, all looking remarkably pissed. Naruto, despite his isolation, had the instinctive male response. It was not, however, to flee the scene in a great hurry. "I am just delivering a scroll to Jiraiya," Naruto said in a hurry, displaying the closed scroll. The women's rage was then directed fully at Jiraiya, who managed one final glare at Naruto before he was beaten into a bloody pulp. You see, the instinctive male response to these situations was not to run but to deflect the blame onto someone else and watch with amusement the results. When the women were done, they turned their glares towards Naruto, who was watching with amusement. "You found this funny?" one of the women said in a threatening tone. Naruto nodded and smiled innocently. "It was very funny watching him get beat up like that," Naruto responded with his most innocent smile. None of the women could find it in their hearts to accuse him of being a pervert. "Just get him out of here," the woman said finally. Naruto nodded and went to pick up Jiraiya. Fastening both his chains and his arms around the moaning Jiraiya, he lifted him up onto his shoulders and dragged him away from the bathhouses. When they were a suitable distance away from the bathhouses, he dropped him to the ground. Jiraiya groaned and rubbed his head. "You said you have a message?" he asked groggily. Naruto handed over the scroll. Jiraiya read over it once before looking up at Naruto. "You're coming with me, kid," he said with a rakish grin. Naruto stared at him in excited disbelief. "Where?" he asked. Jiraiya rose off the ground and dusted himself off. "Tanzaku Gai," he responded. That was all Naruto needed to hear. He let out a shout and started to hassle Jiraiya about when they would leave. "Tomorrow at the main gate," he said with a hassled air. Naruto nodded and rushed back to his home to tell Kurenai as well as prepare. When Naruto had left, he looked at the scroll again and shook his head. The fact that his teacher, his mentor and friend was getting old was not something he wanted to confront. THSTA all for now. If you enjoy, then please like, share and do comments.